was about 4. This was in 1997. My mum and brothers went to a water park on a weekend during the summer. The park was set up so that you would walk through the entrance and run directly into a food court with the little information or map station there. To the left was inside an arcade area with a roller coaster, a little one, directly outside of it, and behind the arcade building was an enormous wave pool. To the right of the entrance was the kiddie park, and then behind the kiddie park was a lazy river and all the water slides with it. Since my brothers were older and they wanted to ride the big slides, my mum and me split from them to head to the kiddie park. I remember playing for a little while, making some friends with some of the kids, when this one little boy asked me if I wanted to go to the wave pool. Since I was little, my mum told me that I was not allowed to go to the wave pool, at least without an adult, so I told him that I couldn't. He then said that it's not a problem. My dad is already waiting for us, and he's already told my mum that he was going to watch us. Well, being a dumb kid and marveling at the wave pool since we got there, I was pretty much sold and followed him over there. My mum probably didn't notice at the time because the lawn chair that she was sitting in around the kiddie pool was being blocked by little kid slides and billions of other little children. But we headed to the wave pool and met the kid's dad. He immediately took my hand and guided me into the wave pool. I remember only being there for like 2 minutes tops until he picked me up and carried me back out of the pool. I don't think that I even asked where we were going, but I assumed the food court because that's where we were headed. I then remember reaching the entrance gates and a lifeguard approached us and asked if my name was so-and-so, and I said yes, and started crying because I guess I thought that I was in trouble. The lifeguard then grabs me from the dude, and I see my mum running up sobbing. Years later, we're revisiting this story, and she tells me that she noticed that I was missing pretty quickly and told a lifeguard to close off the entrance to the park. I was wearing a yellow bathing suit with pink flowers on it and 2 yellow ribbons in my hair, so the description gave me away instantly when the man was carrying me out, that is. I asked my mum about the kid, and she had no idea what I was talking about. She said that it was just the singular man, and apparently he ran to his car in the parking lot as soon as the lifeguard took me out of his arms. In other words, there was no kid with him. One night while I was about 17 or maybe 18, I was living in this old Victorian home on the top floor. I lived alone. You could afford to live alone back then. And it was a creepy place. I loved the upstairs. It was very nicely done, and it was only $279 a month, close to the downtown of the city that I was living in. Now, one night, I was unexpectedly in for the evening. I had a full-time job, a part-time job as well, and a very active social life, so being home alone was pretty rare for me. It was raining very hard that day, and I remember looking outside and watching the puddles get bigger and bigger. I went to bed quite early. Suddenly, though, I woke up abruptly after what felt like I had been sleeping for a long time. It was completely dark, almost pitch black in my bedroom. There was just a bit of light in the corner of my room from the streetlight outside. I looked to my digital bedside clock. I had only been asleep for 5 minutes at the most, though. I kind of got chills then, and I heard what I can only describe as like a hissing sound. I looked up to the ceiling of my bedroom, and there was a black blob-like form that was just moving and changing size and slowly making its way to me. By the time the realization that it was coming to me hit me, I became unable to move my limbs, my body. I could not talk or scream. I just laid there, unable to do anything but watch it get closer to me. When it reached me, it just kind of settled on me. I could feel its weight. I couldn't close my eyes. I so desperately wanted to, but I just couldn't. The terror that I felt cannot be described, though. The evil that I felt from this form was immense, and I have not felt anything like this, that kind of evil, in my life ever. After what seemed like hours, though, suddenly it was gone. My room got brighter and I was able to move again. I checked my clock, but again, only 5 minutes had passed. This experience happened 2 more times while I was living in that old Victorian house. I later learned, though, through research at the library, that I had apparently been visited by an incubus. When I returned to the city that I grew up in and lived in that house, I drive by it. It's still standing, and I don't know if it's divided up into 3 separate apartments now, but it's a lot more run down, that's for sure. A lot of strange things would happen in those rooms. Things would go missing, and I'd find them in very odd places. And as far as I'm concerned, that house, it's definitely haunted. I was traveling with some friends on some 4x4 trails in southern Idaho. We were camping out one night, singing music around a campfire for quite a while, and my friends decided to go to bed eventually. My ex and I stayed up a little bit longer, hanging out around the fire and just enjoying the atmosphere. Then suddenly, everything just got dead silent, like the world got put on mute. I'm no stranger to this phenomenon. It generally happens when there's a predator nearby, and being in bear country, I had my bear spray on me, so I wasn't too worried. My ex and I continued to enjoy the fire, though, until we heard someone way off in the distance say, "honey," 3 times. You could tell it was far away, but it also had the sound of a whisper rather than a yell, an almost questioning tone, like it was a woman calling out for her husband. My friend peeked out of his rooftop tent and asked if we were the ones calling out, but we weren't. The weirdest thing, though, is that it just didn't sound right. More so something that sounds like a woman calling out "honey," but not actually a human woman. I couldn't put my finger on what it was, but the more rational side of us decided that it may have been a hiker or something. The moon was full, so the idea of a couple hiking at night, especially since we weren't too far from the nearest town, wasn't too unlikely, I guess. My friend and his girlfriend, they decided to rejoin us for a little bit, and they also commented on the lack of wildlife sounds. We sat for a few more minutes before, again, hearing that "honey" sound. My friend agreed that it didn't sound right at all. He called out hello just in case there was some poor lost woman somewhere, but nothing responded. A few minutes later, we heard the same call, but from the complete opposite direction. With how far it sounded, there is just no way some lost hiker could have circled all the way around our camp that quickly. We lit up our floodlights, and we quickly booked it out of the area, and ended up cutting our overland trip very short. I still have no idea who or what made those noises, and it really still creeps me the heck out. Honestly, too, I'm really not sure if I'll be traveling to southern Idaho ever again. Now, I know that this sounds fantastical and wild, and honestly, I couldn't disagree. This is in fairly remote backcountry, West Virginia, which is known for being old and haunted. It was experienced entirely by the 2 of us, but the worst parts by all 4. This led to all 4 of us at some point battling personal issues in our lives that I believe stemmed directly from this encounter. The following is, at least to my memory and what I've been able to corroborate with the other people that were there, 100% accurate and true. So when I was 17, 2004, we had a bad experience camping near haunted train tunnels and sites of sudden tragic death. The history of the immediate 1 square mile area is that mother and son drowning in the creek nearby, drug dealers killed in state police shootout at a nearby hunting cabin, and many years before, cheap laborers had been killed building this double set of train tunnels. They were actually buried in a long-forgotten little graveyard nearby the tunnels that has since been found and restored. We decided to go camping before graduation as a friend group of 4, just to do something one last time before we all went our separate ways in life. This is a private property on the backside of a big hill around which the creek flows in a huge several-mile-long bend. A camp set up and fire going. Shortly after nightfall, my cousin and I sat back on the creek bed, maybe 20 yards away from the camp spotlight, fish in the water. We then began to hear a sort of rhythmic sloshing sound. A slosh of what sounded like somebody wading through the water, maybe halfway up to their shin deep. So we shined the light around upstream, and we then spotted symmetrically and rhythmically consistent disturbances made by what looked and sounded like invisible feet or legs sloshing toward us. When we would turn our spotlights off, it would start again. It would then stop when illuminated, and whatever it was definitely reacting to us. And this was the first ice bucket stomach clench moment we knew that this was not fish and could not rationalize what was actually happening. This scared us pretty badly, but we decided best to be kept to ourselves and join the others gathered at the fire suddenly. As we made our way back, we heard the sloshing make its way to where we were on the bank and the noise stopped. Given the speed that we witnessed it moving and how far it was from us when we were watching it, it must have sped up to make it to the bank that we were on in the amount of time that it took us to get to the camp. Others at the camp heard it as well and figured that we'd either gotten in or somehow riled up some fish, but we just played it off in the end. And as crazy as it sounded and looked like an invisible person wading towards us through the water. After the noise ended at the creek bank, we then all saw the tall grass disturbed as something that we couldn't see ran around the foliage perimeter of our circularly cleared campsite. Now, this could have been an animal, I admit, but whatever it was fast. We then began to hear what sounded like a man talking to us, as in speaking into the ear of each person, the left ear, if that matters. At first, it sounded like garble, really, but after maybe 15 to 20 seconds, we could make out the words saying we shouldn't be there, and we needed to leave, before finally addressing us directly and saying slightly more forcefully, "You need to leave." Obviously, as you can imagine, this was absolutely terrifying, and at first we thought that it was a person or group of people out there walking up on our camp and that it was dangerous. We were all frozen with fear though, but then adrenaline suddenly hit. As we freaked out and started to run to our ATV, all four of us saw what we all described as a tall black shadow man wearing what looked like a hat, relaxing against the front of our ATV. It straightened up when we saw it, and it saw us, allegedly, and it just sort of hung there staring at us for a few seconds. No feet, the legs ended in sort of wavy lines, like looking above the fire at the heat waves. It stood out against the dark night behind it, though, and it was definitely there. The girl screamed, which broke our fear freeze, and it zipped like the Flash back towards the train tunnels people had died in. Interestingly, when we went to start the ATV, it sort of turned over sluggishly as if the battery had been slightly drained, despite working fine not long before when we rode it down. This entire event happened over the course of, I don't know, I want to say maybe 5 to 10 minutes, and within an hour of the sun going down. After putting our story out there, I received a lot of feedback from people as well who have also had bad encounters in this area over many years. Even a guy I worked with who didn't know that we knew this area told me that my uncle had hired him to trap in that area, and it was the only place that he didn't check traps alone at night. He said that it was almost like the animals leave the place at night and it was completely quiet out there. No less than a month later, my uncle who owns the property was up on the hill raccoon hunting at night with a dog. At some point, the dog was on a rock face up above him and actually knocked a large rock loose that fell and struck my uncle in the side of the neck. This understandably messed him up pretty bad and paralyzed almost his entire body, but he still had limited functionality on his left side. We could never figure out how he got himself back to his ATV and turned it over and drove himself out of there because, really, he just wasn't capable of that anymore. It wasn't until probably maybe 2 or 3 years later, around Halloween, when my story makes its rounds on the local Facebook groups that my uncle texted my mother out of the blue. You have no reason to believe my uncle's character reference, but honestly, he is a salt-of-the-earth, hunting, farming, working sort of man, even working past his retirement as a millionaire. He's honest, funny, and just incredibly a stand-up guy. He is easygoing, but also no nonsense for sure. In his text to my mother, though, he said, "I've never told anybody this before, and I probably won't again. But the man in the hat that the kids saw at the creek that night helped pick me up off the ground and put me back on the ATV and turned me around." Until I heard that, I had always assumed that the Shadow Man was the one who was trying to scare us out of there, but thinking back on it, maybe he was the one whispering to us, telling us that we needed to leave and possibly avoid something scarier and more dangerous. Although I honestly have no idea what could have been scarier than that. So I just wanted to come on here and talk about my house and some of the weird stuff that's been going on recently in it. I've lived in this house alone for about 5 years now, I would say. Nothing really noteworthy happened until 2021. And it really wasn't anything crazy. Like small stuff. My garage door would be open when I thought that I'd closed it. The sink is running, cupboards open, etc. I started noticing other stuff happening around that time as well, though. I would think that I'd hear footsteps around my house, but it was always something that I thought that I could play off as just being tired since my work full-time along with college and all that. It didn't happen all too often as well, so I didn't really worry too much about it. But it started to become more frequent as years have gone by, and recently a few things have happened that have definitely got me pretty spooked, to the point that I've stayed at a friend's house because of them. I'll share them now, but I'm really not sure what I want out of this. Maybe some clarity or something, or some advice on what to do, but yeah, here's what happened. So the first thing that happened was around August of 2024. I was sitting in my office room doing some homework and playing some music. I started to hear what I thought sounded like a woman at my door. Now, I note, my next door neighbor is a single mother and she goes on walks past my house literally every night. Figuring that she might be at my door asking for something, I open the door, only to find no one there. I close the door and sit back down, and over the next week or so, I started hearing what I thought was a woman talking just out of earshot. I would think that it was my TVs, but I keep them off when I'm not using them. I was pretty stumped and frustrated over it as well. It all built up to one night where I'm laying in bed and I hear this same voice, lady just out of earshot, talking at my bedroom door. Tired and creeped out, I jumped out of bed to check, only to find when opening my door, nobody was there. It chilled me enough to where goosebumps formed. I locked my bedroom door, which I never do, and got back into bed. Maybe 5 minutes later, it started happening again. I got back up and literally screamed, "Leave me alone," packed a bag, and I ended up spending the night at a friend's house a little ways down the street, and it hasn't happened since. The next incident happened about a month ago. Doing homework in my room, all of a sudden my home phone starts ringing. Problem is that I haven't had a phone connected since the hurricane swept through Florida, and have had no reason to put it back in. I quickly jumped out of my bed, shuffled out to check the phone, and sure enough, it's ringing at me. I picked it up and it immediately died. I have absolutely no clue how this could have rung as well, unless the phone battery is jacked up or something. Since then, I have thrown the phone away because, to heck with that, right? Now, this next one is the one that made me want to come on here and talk about my experience thus far. This happened about a week ago. So, I have a boxer puppy who turns 1 on Saturday, by the way, who is usually pretty relaxed. I've never seen him frightened because, frankly, he just doesn't even know what's going on half the time. It's probably about 1 or 2 in the morning. I'm chilling in my kitchen. Knox is laying next to me, probably wanting my food. Eventually, he walks away, and as I finally indulge into said food, he stops about 6 feet from my garage door and starts growling. Like tail up, looking like he's going to bite someone, kind of growl. Mind you, I've never seen him growl like this, not once, so I was a little bit freaked out from the get-go to say the least. I try calling him back over, but he is absolutely dialed into whatever he's growling at. I start walking over slowly to him. I turn the corner to look at my door, and it literally slams. It sounds like a giant object slammed right into my door, loud as anything. My dog jumps back and runs to go hide in my room. I, on the other hand, open my door, run into my garage to see if someone had tried to break in, only to see that everything was perfectly quiet. The door was fine too. Needless to say, I grabbed the dog up and we drove to stay at my friend's house for the night again after that. Since then too, I've been on edge the past week being at my own home. It feels like I have to watch my back constantly now because something just might happen. I'm losing sleep over this, and honestly, I really just don't know what to do at this point. This happened about a year back. I was standing in my balcony around 3 a.m. at night, smoking a cigarette. I was facing the window, and in the window I saw a reflection of something sitting on the rooftop of the building opposite across the street. I turned around and there was nothing. I continued smoking, and as I look up at the roof again, I saw a dark figure sitting on the ledge of the building. It wasn't sitting normal too, kind of like how Spider-Man sits on a light pole, like it was hunting for something. I kept looking at it, trying to figure out what it was and if it's really what I think it is, or am I just sleep deprived or something. After like half a minute of me staring though, I felt like it looked back at me, and I just kept staring at it, and I was completely lost. It was a little bit dark, but I'm certain that this thing had almost human-like features, but in the most messed up way imaginable. A skin that kind of looked burnt, and I'm sure that it didn't have eyeballs and just 2 empty eye sockets. When I realized what I was doing, I immediately turned my head down. Just a second later, I looked up again, and it was gone. I went inside and drank some water, and I then hear a scream coming from somewhere nearby. I went to my balcony again, and the screaming didn't stop. It sounded like a woman, but there were no breaks in the scream. It was a continuous loud scream. Me being a bit of an idiot, I went downstairs and started walking towards the sound. The road was dimly lit and not a soul in sight. I walked, and I think about maybe 500 meters in, I realized suddenly that the sound was exactly like it was from my balcony. The sound should have been louder, much louder, but it was exactly the same. So I kept walking towards the sound, and I walked for a while and still didn't get any louder. Every once in a while I would forget that I was walking, or even where, and just kept walking, and then I would sort of snap back as well. It was a really strange feeling, and at this point I realized that I had come quite far from my house to an almost barren area. So I started walking back towards my house, and the screaming didn't stop. It was an extremely eerie sound, almost human but not quite. A human's breath while screaming, but whatever it was, it didn't sound right. It's almost like I was drawn towards it too. Anyway, I eventually reached home and opened a can of beer, and after a while I went to sleep. I woke up the next morning and went to that rooftop to see if I could find anything. I first inspected the spot that I first saw in the reflection, and then the ledge, and there was nothing. I used baby powder as well. Don't judge, I know, kind of cringe. And a transparent tape too, to see if I could find a fingerprint or find any cells in the sample, but In the end, I found nothing. Now, here's the thing though. I don't really believe in ghosts or the paranormal, at all. I honestly still don't because, well, I'm just a scientist at heart. But I cannot for the life of me find an explanation for this incident. It never haunts me. I didn't lose any sleep over it or anything, but I still wonder what it could have been. I know I wasn't seeing things. I wasn't drunk or high or anything. I guess the reason that I'm sharing this story after a year is because, 3 days ago, I was sitting with my friends and we were sharing weird things that we haven't told anyone about, and I shared this incident with them and they were pretty terrified by it, especially because they know that I'm the kind of guy who laughs at someone who claims that they saw a ghost or even someone who believes in one. A friend told me that she didn't sleep the night after going home and recommended that I share it here to ask people what they think it was. So, what do you think that it was? I'm sharing this because I found this place tonight and I thought that I would share something that I've experienced probably around 2005 to 2006 when I was about 10 to 11 years old. I've never told anyone about this and I always felt the need to though. It's just one of those things that I'll always remember, I guess. So, when I was a kid, we used to go on these monthly vacations in August to a beach town here in Portugal called Sesimbra. It was always very fun, going to the beach every day, playing football with my cousins, going out for dinner to eat seafood. Honestly, it was a really great time to be Portuguese and travel in your own country. Anyways, this old lady would arrange us beachfront apartments every year, and it would vary, some worse, some better. There's this huge building at the end of California Beach, though, which seems to be falling off the edge, and there's these sort of wooden stairs that you need to climb to directly access the building from the beach. If you've been there, then you'll know what I'm talking about, but we were spending the monthly vacation on this building specifically, on one of the top floors. I believe it was the 8th floor, and I used to sleep in the living room couch, which had access to the balcony. I cannot remember sleeping alone on a regular basis, mainly because I was really scared of the dark and being alone at that age. Usually my dad would sleep there as well, while my grandparents stayed in the only bedroom. However, I can't remember why he wasn't there this particular night. But since he worked a full-time job, he would often stay only for 2 weeks instead of the whole month, so it's probably why, I would guess. But anyway, all of that is to say that I was sleeping when I woke up, startled, and I couldn't move. I was conscious, and I don't think it was sleep paralysis or anything like that. I was just terrified because of what I was hearing and seeing. It was a loud buzzing sound and a sort of light blue light covering the whole living room. I swear to you as well that I was so scared that I just couldn't face it, because I felt like this presence, or whatever it was, wasn't good. I don't think it was evil or demonic or whatever, but just terrifying and sort of threatening. It seemed to be some kind of a UFO just hovering near the balcony. I promised myself not to move until it was gone, and then the weirdest thing is that I cannot remember if I fell asleep again or if I simply waited for it to go away, but the next thing that I remember is that it was morning. What I do remember, though, is thinking to myself, this isn't a dream, this is real, and I won't forget that this is really happening. So obviously I remember that part, but as for that time gap, I have no idea what happened. Anyway, this felt good to get it off my chest after so many years and finally voice it and tell some other people. If you have any input or if you would like to share any thoughts, then please do. This happened to me Wednesday night. So my boyfriend lives in the town over and he orders me lifts back and forth to go and see him. We've been doing this for over the past 7 months without any problems. But we spent the day together and had an amazing time as always, and he ordered me a lift back home. The guy pulls up and my boyfriend puts me in the car and gives me a passionate kiss goodbye. The driver is from Cuba, hardly speaks a lick of English, and is using Google Translate the entire time to talk to me. First, it started off as, "Do you mind sitting in the front seat? I don't like for people to sit behind me." Okay, no problem. However, instead of letting me out of the car, he asks me to climb over the seat, which made me feel a bit uncomfortable, and then I realized that he was staring at me the whole time that I'm doing so. Then he proceeds to tell me, "I hope I'm not being too daring, but you're very beautiful." Okay, cool, I get this compliment all the time, so I say thank you, but I'm a bit put off by this, to be honest. He goes on like a regular driver, asking me if the music was okay, and the volume and all that, the regular stuff. Then he starts asking me about the address that I'm going to. "Am I taking you to your home?" I reply, "Yes, I'm going home." He then asks, "Can I go home with you?" I laugh at this and say no. He asks about the guy that put me in the car, if he was my boyfriend or my husband. He's my boyfriend, my soon-to-be husband. He asks, "Can I be your boyfriend too?" I say absolutely not. He asks why not. I say that I'm totally against that I'm in love with my boyfriend very much, and that I'm extremely loyal and faithful to him. He says he doesn't have to know. In Cuba, we believe in having multiple partners, and not all of them know about each other. And I say, well, that's definitely not a thing for me. I don't believe in that one bit. He says, "Your boyfriend makes the mistake of sending you home alone. I would have taken you myself to make sure you got there safe." I'm getting very upset at this point, and I'm only laughing at what he says, trying to maintain a friendly composure because I know how ugly things could turn if I start giving this guy attitude. He doesn't speak again for a while, and when he does, he asks me again if he could come home with me. I tell him no again, and he says, "You're so beautiful. I really want to be your other boyfriend." I don't even say anything, but shake my head no and start fidgeting with my phone. He tells me that he has a lot of money and that he would take care of me. I told him that I didn't care about that and that I wasn't interested. He asks if he could give me his number so that we could text each other, and I say no. After what seemed like an eternity, we pull up to my house and he gets down trying to help me with my bags. I decline his help and he tells me, "Hold on," and pulls out his phone one more time and asks, "Can I come inside with you?" I tell him have a good night and to have a safe trip back, and dart inside as fast as I could, locking all the doors behind me, calling my boyfriend immediately so that he could report this weirdo because I don't want this unpleasant experience to happen to anybody else. In the end, though, the only thing Lyft did was give my boyfriend a $5 credit to his account for the unpleasant experience. He wasn't even able to tell him. He really wasn't even able to tell them why it was so unpleasant. And look, I know, stories like this aren't actually the scariest or creepiest ones out there, but if you were a young woman and in a stranger's car like this, and they were pressing like this and trying to come into your home and everything, trust me, going through something like this is actually pretty terrifying. So yes, ladies, creepy drivers are definitely a thing, and please, be careful out there. So I'm a man living alone in an apartment, for reference. I was walking into my building this evening and a lady that I've never talked to before and rarely even seen said hello. I'm personable and polite, so I said hello back and went to walk into the building. Then she asked how I was and how the weekend was going. I assumed it was just some friendly small talk, so I obliged, and then immediately she asked where I worked and how long I've lived in the building for, which threw me a little bit but seemed innocent enough. Then, about as soon as I finished answering, she said, "No one has ever helped me or offered me help my whole life, and I'm just trying to better myself, but nobody will help. People don't ask me to go out and do any fun things, and I like to do fun things." So I just kind of stammered something about how that's rough or whatever. Again, immediately once I stopped talking, she started up the same thread, a bit frustrated and exasperated. I don't have any friends. No one offers help. I'm just a nice person. I'm paraphrasing, but that was basically it. This whole time she's like barely blinking though, won't break eye contact and is kind of cornering me as well. My hair on the back of my neck is up and my skin is crawling, and my super came out and said that she needed me for something and got me inside. She then told me that I really shouldn't be talking to her. I said that I thought maybe she was just lonely and socially inept, but she said to avoid her. Women like this seem to have a good instinct about dangerous or unhinged people, so I plan on following her advice, but as someone with friends on the spectrum and having worked with the mentally disabled in my life, I at first thought that maybe it was just that. Now, it's been a few hours and honestly, I still cannot shake this uneasy feeling. I thought that I would ask anybody here if they knew what this might be, or maybe if this is ringing any bells or setting alarms off for anyone, because I don't want to treat someone who is just eccentric as a pariah, undeservedly too. But honestly though, I would be lying if I didn't say that my gut is screaming for me to be careful. Over a year ago, I was forced to move out of my apartment due to a serious mold problem that was making people sick, and the management refused to remediate it to the extent that we needed them to, and they did as little as legally possible, basically. But because of all of my things that were there essentially were caked in toxic mold spores, it was a huge effort to thoroughly clean what could be cleaned and bring the rest to the dump. We didn't thrift them because, well, the contamination was either too difficult or just not possible to clean certain items, like couches and mattresses and things like that. But anyway, my sister-in-law was helping me sort through everything that I owned to determine what was worth keeping and cleaning. I lost most of my belongings at this stage, but while we worked, she kept saying that she felt uncomfortable in certain rooms and couldn't shake the feeling. I didn't think too much of it. We were alone at night, and I suggested that we move out to the brightly lit porch instead. Every now and then she would turn back inside to grab a box or a tool or whatever, and then she said that she saw some shadow figures. She said that she didn't say anything earlier because it might have been her imagination, but now apparently she was sure. Well, we had done a lot of work, so we decided to just wrap things up and leave in the end. Now, on the way back to the car, she glanced back at the unit and she froze. She then says, "Look in the windows. You don't see that?" I didn't see anything out of the ordinary at first. She then held firmly onto my arm while trembling slightly and said, "How do you not see that? It's right there." She was apparently seeing a shadow figure, clear as day, looking right at us. Now, I may not have seen anything or felt anything, but just the fact that she was just standing behind me, gripping my arm harder and harder, and now had tears in her eyes. This woman is no actor. She was genuinely terrified. So now I was a little bit spooked myself. We got into the car and we left, and she said that the thing followed us with its face. I don't think that she could see discernible eyes, though, as we drove past it. We said some prayers to St. Michael and others, and really, that was about it. Now, could it have just been the mold problem? Maybe, but as far as I know, the mold in there, it really shouldn't have caused anything like that. Could she have just been seeing things? Possibly, but why the reaction like that? To this day, I'm really not sure what happened, but all I know is that it was a bit of a scary experience, and to be honest, I was glad that I was leaving. For a little bit of context, this happened last year around February. I am 17 and I'm a female. So, it was a random day. I had just finished school and I was home. I've always been very scared when I'm home alone, but Like, it's not like all the time, but sometimes it just gets to me, and I feel very bad and a bit paranoid, really. I'm just going to describe to you as well how my hallway is made, so that you can understand the context to this story. So at the beginning of the hallway, there's my bedroom on the left, and after that, there's my parents' bedroom, still on the left, and at the end there's the bathroom that is the toilet too. The door to the bathroom is weird though, because there's sort of a curved window in it, so like if I'm inside the bathroom I can see movements, and vice versa if I'm outside. I can also see movements from inside the bathroom, but it's not very clear. Anyway, so I was in my room and I decided to go to the toilet that was in the bathroom, and when I was in it, I didn't close the door or anything because, like I said, I was home alone. And then I heard a sound coming from my parents' room, like the floor was creaking and somebody was walking towards me. Of course, I locked the door right away, and so, I had like 10% on my phone and all that in all the horror movies. But honestly, I have zero survival skills, and I didn't think that it was that serious, so I called a friend on FaceTime and told her everything, but really I was scared, but sort of still laughing. It's what I do when I get terrified. So I decided to approach the said curved window that I mentioned earlier, and that was when I saw a man. I started to scream like I'm calling the police and leave and stuff like this. I didn't have a lot of battery on my phone, but I decided at this point to call my dad, who quickly rushed home. But still, at this point I had no battery and I just had to pray for my dad to get home quickly. I was scared, and I imagined that when my dad was going to open the front door that the man was going to jump on him or something like that. After about 45 minutes, where I was just sitting in the bathroom on the toilet, but holding the door in case the man tried to push it open, my dad finally arrived. And trust me, I heard the floor creak again. And then my dad told me that I could come out and that there was really nothing there. In fact, there were no windows open or anything. I was really confused by that, and I think about this whole thing often. Like, did I imagine everything, or did something really happen? Just so you know as well, I'm really not into the supernatural stuff or explanations, so my theory is that somebody actually broke into the house at some point. I happened to come home at around that moment. They hid, they were somewhere around the house, and they got out before my dad got home. Really, that's the only logical explanation for it. Still though, whether paranormal or not, that is a terrifying thought. About 6 or 7 years ago, a friend and I were on our way to visit another friend of ours who had moved to a small town for a teaching job in a state high school. All of us grew up in the same seaside state capital, and the small town in question is about 120 kilometers of bad road, curvy and slippery, but through it is a very scenic route as it goes through hills and also a natural reserve. Now, I cannot remember much of the tree trip per se, but really it doesn't matter too much. I was driving and we hopped onto the highway that goes inland. Rain was pouring down and we were listening to Black Flag whilst talking about music when I stopped at a gas station because the gas was getting low, and this friend and I, well, we're kind of charmers, so we start some small talk with the cashier and I mention that we're going somewhere. The cashier then mentions a shortcut through a dirt road instead of the usual highway, citing that it would cut 30 minutes short off the trip, but that it wasn't really that safe given the weather conditions. I emphasized that it was raining hard, but we were both idiots and, at the time, drunk idiots as well, so we kept an eye on the entrance and took the shortcut. It was a rocky road that cut through the Atlantic forest, probably illegal since it also cut through a national park. Due to the heavy rain, as you can imagine, it was especially rocky and muddy, so I had to keep a steady speed of about 5 to 10 kilometers per hour, in a Ford KA 2015, mind you. There was not a single light in sight as well. Not a house, not a street light, only the car headlights showing nothing but water pouring down, and a disgustingly horrible road ahead. We were joking about how the rain stopped and My friend said that he wanted to take that chance to take a bit of a leak, so I just stopped in the middle of the road and I told him to hurry up. He then covers his shoes with a pair of plastic bags from the beers that we bought and goes to the front of the car. I honk a few times just for the heck of it, to take a few laughs of the situation, and he moves a little bit forward where the headlight sort of doesn't hit him anymore. And it took the time to light a cigarette to hear him kind of exclaim, sort of yell in fright, I guess, like when you're taken by surprise by something. And the guy ran back to the car, slipping and falling on the ground and messing up all of my passenger seat with his muddy pants and slamming the door. He then looks at me and says that he saw what he believed was a mountain lion or something like that, and that I should slam the gas and get the heck out of here. Obviously, I couldn't do that because of the conditions. Also, it would mess up my car suspension. Instead, I turn off the music, we wait a little bit, and nothing happens. But after about 20 seconds, we both see a huge, and I mean absolutely massive figure move between the trees. It was at least 2 meters tall or so, and we couldn't really see much of it, only black fur and the eyes that reflected the car's headlights. But as fast as we saw it, the thing went left and back into the woods. I think that I speak for both of us when I say that we were absolutely frozen and ecstatic all at the same time. To this day, I still don't know how I could remain calm enough to start the car and slowly drive away to our friend's place. We told him about it, and he said that it was probably a mountain lion still, but I don't know. Mountain lions aren't typically 2 meters tall. They may be horizontally that long, but not tall. And I swear that I could hear its footsteps as it ran away as well, despite the windows being closed, so whatever it was also extremely heavy. Anyway, I just wanted to share this in case anybody out there might know what the heck we saw that night. I was born and raised in Denmark, but I originate from Macedonia, and my whole childhood we mostly visited Macedonia by car, rarely by plane, which is a 2-day trip. We always either ended up sleeping in Hungary or Serbia as well. My parents always preferred to spend the night in Subotica, Serbia, the first city after the Hungarian-Serbian border, because many travelers had had bad experiences, including my grandparents, with robbery in that region of Hungary. Now, I was about 8 or 9 when this happened. We got a motel in Subotica, don't know which one, but we got 2 rooms. My brother shared the room with my father, and I shared it with my mother. The motel room was pretty standard. Right to the entrance was the bathroom, and the entire wall on the left of the entrance were wardrobes, drawers, and in between those, there was a table with a mirror above it. There were 2 twin beds, which I didn't like because when I was a kid, I couldn't sleep without feeling that there was a person behind my back as I sleep on my side. I used to sleep in my brother's room, even though I had my own room, but my mum slept on the bed closest to the entrance, and I slept closest to the windows. As I said, I couldn't fall asleep because I was scared to turn my back to the open, so I was just sort of laying there on my back listening to my mum snoring. I was awake for a long time, trying desperately to fall asleep on my back, and at one point I heard a crack near the entrance. I calmed myself down because, it's old furniture and it cracks, right? Plus, that often happens at home anyway too, but then the drawer closer to the beds, on the left of the mirror, cracked even louder than the one at the entrance. At this point, I was really scared. I probably stopped breathing to hear if anything else was going to happen. I always hold my breath when I'm scared and focusing at the same time. But it was quiet. And instead, I see a silhouette in the mirror. Not on our side, but inside the mirror, pass slowly. It was like grey smoke almost. It went from left to right, and when it went out of the frame, it was very quiet for a couple of seconds. And then the wardrobe on the right side of the mirror, it made a huge bang, as if somebody had punched it with all their force. I was obviously scared, and I didn't move nor close my eyes. I just stared at the wall for hours before, eventually, I must have fallen asleep. Now, you might wonder why I didn't wake my mum or start screaming, and to tell you the truth, I really don't know why either. My parents always told me ghosts aren't real, so I'm guessing that was probably the reason. Because I am mostly scared of not being believed, which is also the reason that I haven't spoken about this to many people. Another reason was that I am a boy, and when I was little I had been told to man up a lot, so I didn't want to show any signs of weakness, I guess, and another reason too was probably also the fact that I was too scared to move or do anything. I was completely frozen. Today, I wish that I had said something to my mum, though. As a kid, I thought that both my parents didn't believe in the paranormal, but now I know that my mum does. My dad doesn't, though. So in recent years, I told her, and she said that I should have woken her up, but she also said that I was a kid, implying that I don't remember the situation all that well. I've also told my brother about this, and he believes what I saw, but he thinks that it was some kind of my mind playing tricks on me thing because I was scared, which I'll admit is a possibility, but really I don't think so. Another possibility I thought of, though, was that I had a sleep paralysis episode. But that was an ongoing theory of mine up until the point that I actually experienced sleep paralysis once, and it wasn't the same as that time in Serbia. In Serbia, I was wide awake the entire time. I never really fell asleep prior to the event with the said silhouette. I have had other creepy encounters, but for all of them I always thought of a rational explanation. This one, though, this is the one that bugs me, because genuinely I just really don't know what to make of it. After my experience with sleep paralysis, I've started to believe a bit more in this stuff. Not because of the sleep paralysis itself, but because I know now that the encounter in Serbia really wasn't sleep paralysis. And I'm sharing this because, well, I want more people to see it or hear it and tell me if they know anything about this. I would be happy to take any answers, questions, or information that you guys might be able to provide. I work at a big retail store as a self-checkout host. But most of my days are spent walking laps and listening to customers saying things like, "I don't work here," or "Why aren't you on the register?" I understood their frustrations. Usually, there would be 2 or 3 of us at the self-checkout, and maybe 2 manned registers open. We got a new guy in. His name was Terry. Terry always wore a mask as it was 2021 and COVID was still COVIDing. I was training him, telling him to stock candy in bags and all that. He would ask questions anyone would ask, if I'm in school, if I have a girlfriend. I lived in a small city or big town that had a good college. Students from all over the country would come and usually wound up with prisons or retail. I usually asked the same questions too. I told him no on both accounts, and he then asked if I ever went hunting. We had a lot of woods and a big forest around town. No, I don't really like guns. He said that he'd have to take me one day, though. A few days go by, and he's over on my side again. He asks if I have any family in town, and if I did, do they live close? I live 3 doors down from my mum. He starts talking about hunting again, how he was out with his buddies and started using pack tactics, where they would box in the prey and finish off. Weird for deer, seeing as they flee at the first sound of any noise. He's off for a few days though, because new hires have problems getting hours for the first 3 weeks. I talked to one of my co-workers, and they tell me that he asks a lot about me. The next time I see him, his questions are very telling. How tall would you say you are? How much do you weigh? How well do you know the woods past so-and-so street? I'm a pretty big guy at 6 feet and 300 pounds, and when he brought up hunting again, a creepy thought would send a chill down my spine. Come on, man, you'd like it. Just some good old boys shooting and stuff, late at night in the middle of the woods. But then, the real fun starts right before dawn. They won't know what hit them. The mask hid most of his face, but I could see it rise when he smiled. I don't know why he thought that that would be a great way to convince someone, other than feeling like they were about to hunt me. It sounded like I would have been bored as heck out there. I must have made a face or something because he turned and walked away pretty quickly. I told a couple of co-workers about it, but that was really the last day. I never saw him again after that because he just left and never came back. And honestly, I'm kind of grateful for that. I've had many paranormal encounters, starting from my teenage years, intensifying in my early adulthood, and seemingly tapering off now that I'm in my late 30s. The first experience that I remember, it was in 9th grade, coming home from school. My parents were both working, so usually I'm home by myself until late dinner. I usually get the rice started in the rice cooker and thaw the meats. And this afternoon, I was extra tired from wrestling practice, so I was relieved when I came home and heard rustling in the kitchen, and the faucet turning on and off too. I didn't actually look in there to see who it was, but I assumed it was my mum because sometimes she'd get home early from her restaurant job. Sometimes they have like private events or whatever, and they'd send some waitstaff home. I turned the corner to the bedroom and yelled out to her, "Can you wake me up in like an hour? I wanted to study for a test tomorrow." I heard her say in a raspy voice, "Okay, Con." Con is a Vietnamese term addressing your own child. I thought nothing of it. Maybe she's a little bit sick or something. Anyway, I woke up from the landline phone ringing eventually. Cell phones in the early 2000s were available, but we were poor, so only the adults had them. And it was my mum asking me if I wanted the leftover food from the restaurant. I told her, "Did you go back to the restaurant for leftover food?" She said no, she's been working there the whole time. Chills ran down my back. It was twilight and the sun was setting, so the whole house had an eerie semi-darkness to it. I told my mum to hurry home, please. I didn't lock my bedroom door so I could see out into the dark hallway. I jumped up to go unlock the bedroom door and turned on the light, opened the window and turned on the radio, anything to drown out the silence and the dark. Eventually, my dad got home first, in fact, and I was so relieved to see him, but didn't know if I should tell him what had happened. I waited until dinner time to slip in casually that I thought Mum was home earlier and was doing something in the kitchen. She denied it, and they concluded that I must have imagined the whole thing, but I know that I didn't. Someone was in the house, rustling in the kitchen, turning faucets on and off, and imitated my mum in its raspy voice. It called me Con, so my first thought was that it understood Vietnamese too. No relatives that we knew were going to come over, nor did they have the keys to get into the house anyway. To this day, I still don't know what it was, or how it mimicked my mum's voice. It wasn't the only spooky thing that happened in that apartment, but it was the first and probably the spookiest at that time. Late April of 2022, me and a few friends went on a road trip through southern Illinois. We passed by Shawnee National Forest and stopped at the Trig Observation Tower. After soaking in the beautiful view and smoking a few joints with a random stoner couple that we met on the way up, we parted ways with our smoke buddies and headed out toward our campsite for the night. It was getting late and we were driving down these back roads as the sun was setting. It was pretty isolated too. Incredibly thick woods flanked both sides of the road and not another car in sight. That's when we saw a light up ahead, just barely visible through some thick brush. We slowed down, thinking that it was some campers getting set up for the night or some hikers who got lost before sundown. As we approached, though, something seemed off. The light emanated from this old camper van, and the thing hadn't moved in months. Vines were slowly creeping over the canopy. The whole setup just screamed abandoned. We looked back to have a second look, trying to make out whether or not it was from a fire or something inside the van. At first glance, we didn't see anyone as we surveyed the area, but there he was, feet away from the camper, half hiding behind a tree. He was shirtless, only in his coverall pants and hiking boots. He was staring at us and didn't reply when we shouted a hello. As he began to walk in our direction with one hand hidden behind his back, as if he may be holding something, we called out again to see if he needed assistance or knew where the campsite was, but he just kept coming, silent and expressionless. We didn't wait to see what he was up to. We leaped right back into the car and flew out of there, dust and rocks kicking up as we took off down the road. But we were pretty shaken by the time that we finally pulled into our campsite. But worse was yet to come. We had also left the firewood at the gas station, and with the rain, everything around us was pretty wet. We ended up hanging up our hammocks and attempted to fall asleep without a fire, which wasn't great for our nerves either. But no sooner had we all sighed and started to relax than we heard footsteps coming up from over the crest of a hill, slow and deliberate, just like the guy that we had seen earlier. We killed our lights and sat there in the dark listening. It felt like eons before the steps stopped, and we finally worked up the courage to look around. We took our flashlights and knives just in case and did a quick scan, but we saw nothing. By then, though, we said to heck with this, so we started packing up our gear, figuring that we'd just sleep in the car in the end. But then, from behind us, there was a cough, and that was all we needed to pack up in a hurry and race down the cluttered trail to our car. We didn't even worry about packing neatly. We just tossed all of our stuff in the back, and we got the heck out of Dodge. The next hour was a blur of dark, twisty little roads with no cell service and not a hint of where we were going. Finally, though, we hit a paved road, and after about 20 more minutes and running on fumes, we come upon a little country store with a gas pump connected to an adorable house and auto garage. It had already closed for the night, but the family living there saw us at the pump while they were having dinner and came outside to help. They even opened the store so that we could buy some snacks and some pop in the end. After what we experienced, talking to them was really a huge relief and let us calm our nerves. We eventually got back up on the road and kept driving 6 hours straight, all the way back home. During high school, both my parents worked and I would be home alone after school until around 7 p.m. Normally, I would come home and mess around on the computer in my basement until my parents came home. Right above this area is the kitchen, the laundry room, which are connected to the garage. Every so often after school, I heard footsteps sometimes above me in the kitchen. I blamed it on the house settling and never really took it too seriously. But one day after school, something happened that I could not explain away with pipes. You see, I was on the computer like usual and heard the door to the garage from the laundry room open. The alarm makes a beep when someone opens the exterior door. Then, there were footsteps from the laundry room into the kitchen and the sound of a woman chatting loudly like she was talking on a cell phone. Thinking that my mum had come home early, I went upstairs to see her. When I opened the basement door, I was greeted with a pitch-black house. I called out, "Mum?" Silence. Hello?" No response. Now, scared out of my mind, I turned a few lights on and looked around. That's when I discovered that all the doors were locked. There were no cars in the garage, and really nothing was missing. At this point, I was freaking out a little bit and went back to the safety of the basement. Weird, I know, thinking that the basement is safe, but once my mum came home, I asked if she was home earlier, and of course, she said that she wasn't. This took place when I was 15 or 16 years old, so that would place it in either the summer of 2000 or 2001. My family and I were visiting with my cousin's family in Norfolk, Virginia. My brother and I, we're close in age with our cousins, and I stayed in my younger cousin's room with him and my brother in my older cousin's room. The bedrooms, they were at the end of a hallway. My brother's room was at the end of the hallway, my bedroom was across from my aunt and uncle's bedroom, and my parents, they stayed at the opposite end of the house in the den. So, it had been many years since we'd seen each other, so the first night my cousin and I stayed up after lights out to talk and just catch up. During our hours of conversation, he casually told me that the house was haunted by a woman. He had a reason why they thought that it was a woman, but I've since forgotten that. He told me, though, that the lights would go out unexpectedly from time to time, and there'd be strange noises late at night, and the most common happening would be that the TV in the den, it would turn on in the middle of the night without explanation. I was intrigued by this story. Our conversation moved on to other topics eventually, but in the early hours of the morning, we were still talking when suddenly there was a loud, heavy-sounding bang that sounded like it came from the kitchen. We fell silent and listened as we heard what sounded like footsteps, slowly coming down the hallway towards the bedrooms. The floors were hardwood, and to me, the footfall sounded like a small child that has put on their parents' shoes. They kind of slid, and then the heel would slap the floor. They sounded like they stopped right outside of our bedroom door, in fact. There was silence for a long moment. Then 3 loud knocks, not on our door, but on my other cousin's brother's room door. We both sprang up from our beds and flung open the door. My brother and cousin had already had their door open and were standing there, but there was nothing there. We could all hear our father's infamous snoring coming from the other end of the house, while my uncle, hearing us all saying "what the heck was that" to each other, came out of his room to curse us out and send us off to bed. Needless to say, though, I really didn't sleep very well on that trip. I've dealt with paranormal experiences throughout my life, and I am now convinced that some kind of spirit follows my family from time to time. It usually just shows up as little shadows peeking around corners, or strange noises in the middle of the night. But there's one experience that still freaks me out to this day. I was younger when it happened. So, I was home alone with my younger brother. We had this little dog named Stephanie, a tiny ball of energy who was completely obsessed with Cheerios. We didn't give them to her often because they weren't the healthiest treat, but she loved them more than anything. That morning, I went to the pantry to grab some Cheerios for Stephanie. She was right there beside me, practically bouncing with excitement. I grabbed the box, turned around, and just like that, she was gone. I was so confused, thinking, what the heck? Where did she go? I immediately started searching the entire house, calling her name over and over. 2 hours went by, and still no sign of her. At this point, I was really worried. In a last-ditch effort, I grabbed her favorite squeaky toy, a little pig that she adored, and squeezed it. When out of nowhere, she appeared upstairs in the hallway, right in front of my brother's room. I could see her standing there from the main floor. Relief washed over me, but I was also confused as heck. I called out to her, "Come down here, I have your Cheerios and your squeaky pig toy." But instead of coming to me, she started walking back and forth, crying like she was stuck or maybe scared or something. I was baffled and getting a little bit scared myself at this point. I kept urging her to come to me, but her crying only grew louder and more desperate. So I started climbing the stairs, but the higher I went, the louder her cries became. I began to worry that she might be hurt or trapped, so I hurried up the stairs, my heart racing. When I reached the top, I suddenly felt something scratch down my back, 5 distinct fingers. I kid you not, it felt like a hand had just sort of clawed me. I screamed in shock and bolted towards Stephanie, who was still crying in front of my brother's room. My brother heard me screaming and burst out of his room, totally freaked out, asking what was happening. I told him that something had scratched me, And then out of nowhere, we both started hearing this loud banging on the walls. We were completely terrified, so without thinking, I grabbed Stephanie, and my brother and I ran downstairs to the solarium, which had a glass door. We shut it behind us, thinking that we'd be safe there, but then the banging started again, this time on the glass door itself. We could see through it, and I can assure you that there was no one there. It was just us, but the banging was relentless, echoing through the room. We were both sobbing by now, absolutely terrified. We called our mum, begging her to come home immediately, but she didn't believe us. She thought that we were just imagining things or trying to prank her. Later, when things finally calmed down, my brother checked my back, and sure enough, I had 5 scratch marks running down my skin. They weren't deep, but they were definitely there. And that was really the only time that I was ever physically attacked by, well, that spirit. It makes me wonder, too, if another one entered my home that day, because it's so odd and out of character that it just seems, well, different. I had an experience about 4 days ago that I haven't been able to shake. I was dog or house sitting for my boyfriend while he was away on a backpacking trip. My boyfriend's home is in a semi-remote area at the bottom of a hill, at the back of a few arches of property. He's right next to the highway, which has opposite it a small rural neighborhood. It's both very sketchy and very safe, meaning that the community is close, but people frequently keep to themselves, and there's lots of abandoned, dilapidated homes right next to very well-kept homes as well. It's a pretty typical countryside neighborhood, I guess, but I really didn't feel unsafe to agree to watch my boyfriend's property and his dog, Hennessy. Hennessy is a 115-pound jet black American Bulldog English Labrador mix. He's basically all muscle, and ever since my boyfriend and I began dating, he's become very protective of me and my own dog, Lottie. Lottie is a 57-pound poodle mix. I'm a dog groomer, so she's usually done up in pretty silly haircuts with bows and everything. All of this is to say that one of my dogs is very intimidating, and the other certainly is not. Now, because of his strength, however, I cannot walk Hennessy and Lottie at the same time on my own, and so I usually walk Lottie alone and then go back to get Hennessy and walk him alone. But we do about 30 minutes of walking each, and I like to take Hennessy after Lottie at night because I feel safer with him as it gets later. This is important too because this was the case about 4 nights ago. I was about 3/4 of the way through my walk with Lottie when I got this really weird feeling that I was being watched. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up, and I looked around to see that about 30 feet or so back, there was a tall man in a hoodie standing next to an older, rundown home. I instantly thought that the hoodie was a bit weird. I live in Northern California, and it's early August. It doesn't get colder than like 87 degrees in the evening, especially when the sun was still setting like it was at that time. I forced myself to brush it off though, as I tend to be fairly paranoid due to my years of reading scary stories. But as I kept walking, the sun kept setting and the streets began to slowly get darker. I would glance back from time to time and notice that the man was keeping pace with me, not breaking that 30-odd foot distance, but still. If I turned a corner, so did he. If I sped up, so did he. Finally, we reached the highway, and I crossed right before a car came speeding past, hoping that if the guy was following me, this would put some distance between him and myself, which thankfully it did. But that didn't stop him from continuing to follow me. I walked as fast as I could to the house, not wanting to turn around, but now being able to hear his footsteps on the gravel. At this point, Lottie had noticed him too and started to bark and growl a bit. I forced her to keep moving and thankfully made it back inside the house, slamming and locking the door, hoping that that was the end of it. But it was not. Moments after I'd shut and locked the door, I felt someone trying to open it. The dogs heard this too and started barking because they always do when someone is at the door. There's no peephole on my door, but I can talk to whoever is on the other side, because it's a pretty thin door. So I yelled out and asked who was there. Through the barking, I could hear a man's voice. "I love your dog. Can I meet her?" For some reason, the way that he said it was just so creepy. It was like there was nothing behind it, kind of like he had rehearsed the line or decided to say it beforehand. I yelled back no and asked him to please go away. He paused for another second and then again said, "I love your dog. Can I meet her?" He starts trying the door handle again, this time pushing up against the door. By this point, Hennessy can tell that something is wrong, and so can Lottie. The hair on the back of Hennessy's neck is standing up, and he is gnashing his teeth while growling. At that moment, I don't know what possessed me, but I threw Lottie into the bathroom behind me and grabbed Hennessy by the collar, keeping him close to the door with me. He's still barking and going crazy, mind you. I hear the man repeat that he wants to meet my dog, and I yelled out "leave," and he paused and then slammed into my door. I would say too that the door moved at that moment. I unlocked the door and opened it just wide enough that Hennessy could get about halfway out. He's going bonkers at this point. My hand is starting to hurt from holding him back, and I can hear his teeth clacking as he ferociously chomps toward the man. And well, this dude was not expecting Hennessy. He stumbled back, almost falling over, and cursed as he scrambled to stay off the ground. He didn't even look at me and instead booked it up the hill as fast as he could and out of sight. Eventually, I managed to pull Hennessy back in, and I called the cops to tell them what had happened. I never did get a good look at the guy, and they basically told me that there wasn't anything that I could really do, but they did take my statement and told me that they'd contact me if anything ever came of it. Honestly, though, I am so thankful for Hennessy. After all of that, I snuggled up with him and Lottie that night and cried because it had all hit me how terrifying that really was. I literally went out the next day and bought him the biggest bone that I could find from a pet store, nearly an hour away, because he definitely had earned it. I also got Lottie something too. I don't know why this creep didn't get the hint when I had two dogs barking inside, but my assumption is that he didn't really realize that he was hearing two barks, or assume that if I had two dogs that they were both like my puffy poodle. That is to say that he just wasn't afraid. I'm very thankful though that the guy didn't have a firearm, and looking back now, I probably should have called the cops and kept my door closed, to be honest. But I hope that maybe because he saw Hennessy, he'll know not to come back and mess with us, because if he does, this time I'll let my big sweet boy rip him to pieces. Ever since my grandfather, who lived with us, became sick, and after his recent death, my mother and I have noticed a drastic increase in unexplainable things happening inside of our house. I always tried to write it off, but this night, something happened that truly freaked me the heck out. For some context, we live in the province of Alberta, and our house was built in the 80s. To my mum's recollection, when she first bought the house 13 years ago, there was no reported deaths in the house or any history on the land that it sits on. To bring everything back to the beginning of these events occurring, in December of 2023, my grandfather injured himself going down the stairs and was hospitalized. In his absence is when we, and even my grandfather, who was in the hospital, realized that something had changed inside of our home. Only days after his hospitalization, both my mother and I repeatedly heard footsteps or movements downstairs in the basement. My grandfather's room is in the basement. Many times we chalked it up to just old house noises, wood creaking, the house settling, etc. Until more physical things started happening, like the downstairs bathroom sink running, washing and dryer machines being open when they were previously closed, doors being open which were previously closed, items that were once on shelves being found on the ground, entire filing cabinets of papers spilled on the ground, lights flickering and turning completely off when in a room. Once, the stereo or radio system we had downstairs randomly turned on and blasted the radio for a few seconds before turning off as I walked past. But those were all the things that happened inside the house. But what's even freakier, and what made the rest of my family worried, are two specific instances in my grandfather's hospital room. Once in front of my mother and aunt, and a second time with just my aunt in the room. The first time happened later in the day after dinner, when my mum and my aunt were there. My grandfather leaned into my mother's ear and whispered, "Who's that over there? Is that a nurse?" and pointed to the corner of the room. My mum was confused and told my aunt, and she too became confused because, obviously, no one else was in the room. They thought that it was just him seeing things because the nurse said that he wasn't all up there after his fall. The second time, though, was much more intense and left my aunt hysterically calling my mum over the phone late at night. She told my mum that my grandfather was starting to fall asleep when he just sort of jolted up with a horrified look on his face and quietly told my aunt that the devil himself was standing behind her. She freaked out and stood from her chair and turned and saw nothing. She calmed back down and sat back in her chair and tried to ease my grandfather. She said that he never calmed down and then loudly yelled, "He's trying to grab you." And my aunt said that she felt something touch her shoulder along with a breath on the back of her neck. She quickly called my mum soon after in a panic, and my mum advised her to go home for the night. And after that, there were no more incidences in the hospital. After that, there seemed to be less activity at our house until, well, he passed a few weeks ago. Since then, my mother and I continue to hear the odd sound, objects being misplaced, lights going on and off, in the basement, until about an hour ago, and my mum came into my room at about 10 p.m. and randomly asked if I just wanted ice cream. I said sure to that, and I went to the door to put my shoes on. My mum said that I didn't have to go if I didn't want to, so I chose to stay home in the end. As she left, she told me to lock the door behind her as I went to the bathroom as she left. I got out of the bathroom and promptly locked the door. I also want to note that our screen door wasn't locked but was definitely latched at the time. After I closed the door, I went back to my room and sat, and I just continued a game that I was playing with my headphones on. After about 10 to 15 minutes of my mum being gone, I very clearly heard my mum's voice yelling my name to come and grab the ice cream. I get up and speed walk to the door yelling, "I'm sorry, I didn't hear you get home." And as I turn the corner to the front door, the door is slightly ajar, screen door wide open, and my mum and her car are nowhere to be seen. I was quite spooked by that because the sound of my mum's voice was so loud that I heard it over the floor fan in my headphones. I relocated the door and locked myself in my room until my mum got home with the ice cream. I told her what happened, and she was also spooked, and we together searched the house in case somebody had actually got in, but there was nothing. I also forgot to mention that the majority of the time our two dogs in the house never barked at anything, except for a few times in the basement, maybe 2 or 3 times. I really don't know how to end this because I'm just not a good storyteller, but the only upside is that we are moving soon, and hopefully this stuff won't keep happening in the new place that we're moving into. I worked security in 2019 to 2021. One place that I was working was a call center, and there was 24/7 guards on scene, 2 in the morning, 2 in the afternoon, and 1 overnight. On the overnight shift, there was no one else in the building, all doors were locked and all ID scanners were locked as well. I need you to understand that there was no one else in the building. There was no way anyone else could have been in the building with me. This happened in 2020 when everyone was working from home and the security team were the only people that were even in the building. So, at every odd hour, I would do a patrol around the building, check into all the rooms that I had to swipe at, and return back to the desk. Other than that, I'd sit there and watch the cameras and play my Switch. Now, one night, while I was there for the overnight shift and the other 2 guards had left, I had to go on patrol. The lights in the building were all out, and It didn't really matter that much because I could see enough with the lights from the parking lot, and I'd never been afraid to walk around alone there because really I enjoyed the job anyway. I walked through the downstairs, checked all the exits to make sure that they were locked, and all the staircases to make sure that they were empty. When I moved to the second floor, I heard one of the phones ringing out in the desks. Not unheard of, and because of the sensitivity of it all, we aren't allowed to touch the phones, except for the front desk ones, obviously. I usually played music to walk around, but this time I'd left my phone to charge at the desk. There was no device on me that could have made a sound. The phone had since stopped ringing, and I was still alone. As I moved to the final part of the building for my patrol, that was when I hear a small thud by the stairway at the back. That didn't bother me too much, but when I heard a female voice call out, "Help me," that was when I froze. I stayed silent, and I didn't move for nearly 15 minutes. It took me a while, but I eventually called out and asked if someone was there, but I didn't dare go over there to try and see. I would have heard something or saw someone moving over there if there had been anyone. I didn't finish my patrol that hour and immediately returned to the desk downstairs where the lights were on in the lobby. My boss even asked me when I told him about it, and he just nodded like, yeah, that happens sometimes. I didn't hear anything else the entire time that I worked there after that. I even checked the cameras that were in that area, and I can assure you that there was no one there. I always used to figure that ghosts were real, or I wanted to believe that they were, but that night completely proved to me that ghosts really are real, and when one asks for help, you probably shouldn't really risk yourself. It's Obon season in Japan, a week in which the spirits of the departed are believed to return to families and loved ones. As such, I'm curious to hear if anyone has had any experiences and encounters with spirits here either in Japan or Asia. Here are some of what myself, as well as family and some friends, have experienced over the years. So my husband is a hard atheist and refuses to believe in the paranormal. He does have one story, however, that made him a bit spooked. You see, he grew up in a mountainous area with little tunnels running through the area so cars can access the more remote places. In many areas, there's a newer lit up and cleanly paved tunnel running directly beside an older and less used tunnel from decades ago. According to him, one day, he and his friends were playing down by a river and chose to head back home through an older tunnel. He went in ahead on his bike and saw a woman and her little girl walk in the opposite direction, towards the middle of the tunnel, and he passed by them without looking too closely. He turned to look back to see where his friends were, and the woman and the girl were nowhere to be found. The tunnel in question would take a solid few minutes to pass through on a bike, let alone on foot. I mean, I've personally walked through the tunnel, and though I didn't come across anything like this, the air gets very cold and heavy towards the middle, to be sure. I also have a co-worker that works at an elementary school about 30 minutes in the mountains. It's an older school, about 100 years or so old, but it's warm and inviting, and I've always felt pleasant when I visit. There's a little nook with couches in the staff room, and it opens to a huge 2-story hall with a hallway leading down to the lunchroom and kitchen areas. My co-worker has recently been seeing a lot of activity in the hall. More than once, he's walked out of the staff room and seen a man hunched over a table in the hall as if reading something. When he walks towards the man, he passes by a pillar and suddenly, the man is gone. He's also seen movement in the nook in the staff room, and lunch ladies often report a presence of a little child in the kitchen who asks them where the lunchroom is. This school has 6 teachers and 25 students, with everyone knowing everyone. The man and the child, though, are reportedly no one that anyone knows. Now, I'm not apt to seeing ghosts, but I like to jokingly say that I was sensitive due to a lot of strange goings-on in my childhood home over the years. This came back to bite me, though, when I got a little bit overly cocky, I guess you could say, during some ghost stories in the town over, and I think something followed me home. So I used to live in Kagoshima, Japan as an English teacher back in 2018. My home was in a city nearby in a bright and warm 2-bedroom apartment that was 2 floors above another teacher's. My best friend lived nearby in a 2-towered apartment complex and below another teacher, Todd, so I would visit the area to stay over and hang out every once in a while. Once my best friend returned to the US, a new teacher, Ashley, moved in. But since my friend's apartment was being renovated, Ashley stayed in the apartment next door for a few months. That October, I took my little black car down and went to a barbecue dinner where Ashley, Todd, and some other friends were telling ghost stories. Ashley was visibly upset when it came time for her story, which was apparently true and happening currently, she said. She would hear walking around from Todd's apartment at late hours, and Todd had told her every time that he was out visiting his girlfriend at the time, so it clearly wasn't him. She also mentioned having horrible dreams about being stuck in her bed while her room filled with water as a ghost with long black hair stood outside of her window, as if demonstrating, "This is what I can do to you." Todd was backing up these claims, confirming the calls from Ashley and that he indeed was never around when they came. His brother, who is like a kind of medicine man or shaman in their community, apparently reached out to him out of the blue, saying that he had a dream that compelled him to draw a picture of what he saw. Todd pulls out the text of the picture his brother drew, and Ashley and myself also began freaking out at its sight. It was a picture of a white ghost with long black hair, crouched as if crawling on the outside balcony of an apartment. Ashley swears that it's exactly what has been appearing in her dreams, and all of us confirm unequivocally that the backdrop of this drawing is the exact building where Todd and Ashley live, the one where I'd visited my best friend dozens of times. Everyone is freaked out, but also sort of excited for some reason, like, oh boy, a real ghost situation, how fun for us. How naive we were, we came to realize. We decided to go back to Todd's place once we finished eating, and I felt a heaviness when I walked in. I told him immediately and seemed intrigued, but brushed it off as it's his apartment and he's got to be able to fall asleep there that night. I noticed that the same area that I felt heaviness was completely fine as I left to go home, but the entire solo drive back to my apartment was incredibly fear-filled and really tense, and I was afraid to look behind me as if I were going to see something in the back seat. I brushed it off as just my imagination, as I too had to be able to fall asleep that night, and proceeded to try and do so when I got home. Now, at 2:30 in the morning, I woke up drenched in a sweat with my arms and fists clenched so tightly around my head that I had lost feeling in them. There was a deep and dark heaviness all around me, and I just felt this overwhelming fear not to open my eyes. I'd never been one to have nightmates or sleep paralysis or anything, and I was completely awake as I remember being unable to fall back asleep and thinking like, oh no, I have work tomorrow, why the heck am I not sleeping at a time like this? The next morning though, I texted Ashley what happened and she freaked out saying that she didn't tell anyone this, but the exact same thing happened to her when she had the nightmares. She also asked me if I heard any wooden-like tapping coming from inside of my house, and I said yes. I noticed something coming from the corner when I got home, and I just chalked it up to the support beam settling. She gets even more worked up over this, saying that she didn't say anything about the corners, but that's where she heard the tapping as well. She and I messaged Todd immediately, asking if there was something his brother could do in this case, since apparently he had a dream about this happening too. Basically, he sent us over some symbols on paper and told us to burn them in the apartment to purify the space, and to leave one unburned to repel whatever it was. It took a few days during which I begged the teacher below me to let me stay with her, as my preciously warm and welcoming home felt suffocatingly heavy and dark in ways that I still struggle to explain. And it took about 3 days to arrive, and until then the tapping continued in corners of my room. In the meantime, I discovered what appeared to be handprints on the inside of my car's rear window after that drive home, which normally wouldn't be possible as I drove a Daihatsu Move at the time, and it was far too small for anyone to fit in the back. A disconnected phone line also rang at 8:15 p.m. one day, which my then boyfriend was there to witness. Once the papers with written symbols arrived, we burned them as told, and the heavy atmosphere cleared up immediately. There's no interesting ending to this story, other than that it hasn't bothered us since. But to this day, I have one of those symbols laminated as protection, so it stays far, far away. I've also stopped going to places said to be hosting frightening spirits because I've wisened up with time and experience. Again though, like I said at the beginning, I'm interested to hear of any other experiences had either here in Japan or around Asia as well. When I reflect on my childhood, I have a reoccurring memory that always baffles me. I remember one day, I was about 5 or 6, I was at home alone with my mum while she napped. I don't have an exact memory, but I recall sitting on the couch in our living room and looking up, and in front of me was a massive, praying mantis-like creature. It was so massive that it filled the entire room. I'm talking like 8 feet tall at least. I don't really recall it moving much, if at all, but I went into freeze mode and felt like I shouldn't make any eye contact. I felt like I couldn't move and was paralyzed by fear. I sat there, trying to be as still as possible for a couple of minutes. I knew distinctly that this was not a dream, too. My childhood brain could only process it as being an extremely large bug, but I felt incredibly confused by just how large it was. I remember kind of just thinking that it wasn't something particularly strange and must have been something that I just hadn't learned the existence of yet. However, I knew that I was scared. Eventually, I mustered up the courage to run upstairs and ask my mum for help. I woke my mum up and told her that there was a massive praying mantis downstairs. She, of course, just thought that it must have been a normal-sized bug. She comes downstairs and, obviously, it was gone. I remember being too stunned by its disappearance and almost embarrassed to tell her what I had actually seen and how strange it was. I remember feeling very confused and trying to understand how my imagination could have possibly generated something that felt so real. Later in life, I had a friend, her name was Eve, that did mushrooms with a bunch of friends. She had a difficult experience with how some of her friends responded to the substance. Eve was essentially supposed to be their guide, but Eve couldn't figure out how to assist the others, and it was as if the others had forgotten how to breathe at one point. Eve said that she was suddenly greeted, though, by a praying mantis, who were somehow giving her advice on how to help the situation. The advice resulted in Eve being able to resolve the problem, too. So, if anyone has any feedback or theories on this, then I would love to hear them. I've always been very confused by it all, and to be honest, I still don't know what to think of it. Something really strange has been happening lately, and I know I'm not crazy because friends of mine have experienced this with me on 2 separate occasions. But I swear that I'm teleporting across town somehow. This has happened to me 3 times, and it's seriously starting to freak me out. It happened for the 3rd time less than an hour ago. I was riding on my friend's car back to my place from a movie theater on the opposite side of town, a trip that would normally take around 15 minutes. It took us 5, and I noticed what had happened almost immediately, but I didn't want to say anything until my friend, E, did out of fear of sounding crazy. On the drive, we randomly ended up downtown, close to my place, much sooner than we should have. The transition is so seamless that I can't tell the difference until I see man-made landmarks like buildings. E mentioned that he didn't make any turns that he'd normally have to get there. We just sort of ended up there. We weren't distracted by a conversation or anything, and the both of us were stone cold sober. Then E started to freak out a little bit. I told him about the other two experiences that I'd had, more on those later, but we made it to my place and decompressed for a bit before he left. In the car, I told E about the other two events that I experienced. The first time I had something like that happen, I was walking to a gas station to grab a snack after work, I think, and somehow ended up walking on a street like a mile down the road. No time had passed at all, and I know this because I check my watch fairly often. The second experience was the more drastic of all three that I've had, though. I was in the car with another friend of mine, his name is Jay, and we were on our way to a Walmart, a 30-minute drive away from his place one morning, but we ended up getting there in 10 minutes. He noticed what had happened shortly after starting the drive over, and we took a turn into this more scenic road on my state, Virginia, which would be a straight path to North Carolina. But instead of us going towards North Carolina, we ended up in a very similar road much closer to that Walmart within a matter of seconds. The transition was nearly unnoticeable until, well, I saw buildings that I recognized from part of the town the Walmart is in. And that experience, it really freaked me out. I have no clue what's going on, and to be honest, I'm genuinely really scared. I don't know what's happening, and I want to find out, which is why I'm here. Has anyone else experienced something like this? Another thing too that happens, and this has been consistent with all three times, is that I, along with E and J, get this sort of horrible burning sensation in our lower chests, and we feel this awful sense of like uneasiness all of a sudden. Standing up after an experience like this feels like a burden, and walking around is awkward and clumsy too. All three times I've had this happen, I, along with E and J as well, have been completely sober. So, please help. Because honestly, I just want to know what the heck is happening. So I was maybe 9 or 10 years old in Mississippi visiting my grandma with my sister. It was the middle of the night and I'd been watching TV. Wanting a drink, I got out of my grand's living room to go to the kitchen. Now, my gran had a deck and a huge window that would show outside. My grandma, she lived right by the woods. Rarely saw anyone at night that weren't hunters looking for deer. I look out the big window, feeling sort of scared all of a sudden. And that's when I noticed, outside, there was a man in a black suit. But the weirdest thing was that he had no face. At least, that's what it looked like. Seeing a man with no face is horrifying, especially right next to the woods, and you know that no one else is awake at the time. I went to the kitchen to get my drink, then looked out the bay window in my grandma's dining room, which was attached to the kitchen. The faceless man was closer to the window now, and he just sort of stood there, unmoving, but seemingly staring right at me. My chest was pounding with fear. After all, the man was closer than before. Going back to the living room, knowing that I'd be safe due to the locked doors, but also still kind of freaking out, in the end I just sort of sat there and watched some TV. I finished drinking my drink and stand up, looking at the window in the living room, and the man was closer once again. Still staring me down, his hands by his sides. Feeling even more panicked, I go to throw away the can of soda that I had to drink in the kitchen. I look down to the bay window once more, and he hadn't moved closer this time. I walk back to the living room and turn the TV off, feeling eyes staring me down. My grandma was asleep, her husband was asleep with his sleep apnea machine going on in the background in their room. I left the living room to go to my room shared with my sister, and I never looked back. I walk into my room to find my sister passed out, soft snores leaving her lips, and eventually I lay down on the ground and I fell asleep. I found the courage to share this after, well, hearing numerous sightings of North American Indian mythical creatures, specifically the short people that seem to go by many names across the tribal regions of America.
This exact type of creature has been sighted and discussed among Aboriginal people in Australia for thousands of years. In the southwest region, they're known as the Warudji, or hairy bushmen. Standing a few feet tall, they possessed insane strength and speed. Prior to colonization, there were stories of their friendship or alliance with Aboriginal people, but also there were stories of conflict and people or even children being taken by them. There were specific rules Aboriginal adults told their children, such as avoiding water bodies at night and in the evening, and no matter what, that never ever whistle in the dark. It invites them and it only spells trouble. Although, even some Aboriginal people say that these stories are just to warn kids about water safety. Well, in 1998, I knew none of this because, well, I'm not Aboriginal, and at the age of 10, when this all happened, I had never even met an Aboriginal person or been taught anything about Aboriginal culture in school. It was the 90s, and Australia had an uncomfortable relationship with the truth and colonization. Every school holidays, I used to leave the city and visit my aunt in the picturesque southwest countryside. I needed no encouragement in going because I love the outdoors and had free rein to run amok on the dirt bike and go fishing alongside the magnificent Blackwood River whenever I felt like it. And so, I went a lot. It was the 90s in Australia, and incredibly safe for a 10-year-old kid to roam the landscape for miles and hours on end, all alone with nothing but a trusty pocket knife. I was able to walk through my aunt's massive property to the edge of the forest, and then into the depths where the river flowed through, fishing for trout and redfin. On the last evening before I was due to go back home to the city, I was down there fishing alone as the sun was setting. I knew that I'd get into trouble being out that late, but having already snared a few trout, I figured that I'd be quickly forgiven. Plus, I was still getting bites, and I remember having caught the fish and kept them in an old metal bucket. I was on my last few pieces of bait anyway when I recall hearing a tiny sort of pinging noise on the side of the bucket. At first, I thought nothing of it because large gum nuts often fell from the trees. But then it happened again, much louder and more forceful this time. I remember checking the bucket and realized that they were small rocks and not gum nuts at all. I looked around assuming it was some kids from a neighboring property, which was very unlikely as it was maybe a 30-minute walk to the next property, at the other side of the river backed onto the national park where there were no other farms for miles too. Plus, I hadn't come across any kids throughout my entire stay at the farm either. But this is where it got pretty scary. The rocks, they got bigger and they started flying in from different directions, cutting my cheek and hitting me in the head. At this stage, I started crying. I was only 10 after all, and dropped the fishing rod. I had 3 large trout in the bucket, and my intention was to pick it up and run back to the farm as quick as I could. As I bent to pick it up, though, I was hit by another rock in the side of the head and fell over. I pulled myself up and I stared over to the other side of the river, the main source of the rocks. What I saw paralyzed my whole body with fear. It was nearly dark at this stage, but I saw the outline of 3 short-looking bodies covered in hair. I would have put them at maybe a meter tall, 3 or 4 feet at most, the size of small children, but with the bodies of men. Their faces looked like they were sort of part ape, part human, but it was their eyes though. Even though it was getting dark, their eyes had this piercing yellow glow, but were completely black in the middle. They wore no clothes, but were covered in extremely thick, sort of clumpy hair all over their bodies, except from the knees down, and had arms that hung almost like cavemen. But here's the strangest thing. They stared at me almost without moving, like literal statues, with a curious expression fixed on their faces, and making absolutely no noise whatsoever. It made no sense as only a few moments before rocks were pelting in from all directions, and yet now they appeared frozen, except for their eyes which followed me. I managed to pull myself up and ran faster than all heck. My aunt was standing on the balcony and watched me tear through the long grass as quick as I could, with blood and cuts on my face. I told her everything and she eventually called the police. One officer came by to get a statement, and he said that he'd visit some of the other farms around town, but he was certain that there weren't any other families in the area. My aunt just assumed that I couldn't see the figures properly due to the lack of light, and maybe even was suffering concussion from the rocks that hit my head. She assumed that they were kids or teens, but I know what I saw, and I'll never forget those murderous-looking yellow eyes, ever. The next morning, I went with my aunt to collect the fishing rod and bucket, and my aunt was shocked to see the fishing rod and the bucket were still there. She thought that it was an opportunistic crime, and we checked the bucket, and what we saw made our skin crawl. 3 perfect trout skeletons were now floating in the bucket, not one morsel left. We don't have bears or wolves in Australia, and even the odd dingo or fox wouldn't have devoured an entire fish and left its skeleton there like that, especially without the bucket being tipped over. The whole ordeal was genuinely terrifying, but as things tend to happen when you're a kid, you just sort of forget about it, or it lives somewhere in the back of your mind rent-free for a while. The police officer, they found nothing of note, and as nothing was stolen, there was no need for further inquiry. It was the talk of the country pub for a few weeks, though. My aunt was a local. The town had experienced odd things throughout the years, such as the sighting of tiger-like animals in the deep forest, and other strange noises and happenings reported by lumberjacks in the deep forest too. But it wasn't until I got into my 20s and became a social worker that I started working with Aboriginal communities in town. During celebratory events, I came to learn of the different Dreamtime creation stories, and eventually I had the confidence to tell an elder about what I went through when I was young. He immediately recognized it as the Wurundjis straight away and said that I was lucky to leave that forest alive. He seemed to think that they must have believed that I was an Aboriginal boy, and I do have a mixed racial background, and the protocol would have been for me to leave a couple of fish outside the bucket, skewered on sticks for them to come and collect after as payment for fishing in their river. But as I didn't, they reminded me, the first few pelts, and when I still didn't, they eventually attacked. There aren't any Aboriginal families in that part of the southwest, Caucasian only, to this day too, which may explain why it only happened to me. The elder believed that they could have taken me though for disobeying their sacred customs. That part always wakes me up in a cold sweat in the middle of the night because genuinely I believe they could have. It's not a story I tell my family and friends, but will confide in with the odd Aboriginal colleague or client at work, and they always tell me similar things. Don't even get me started on the Australian desert. But I'm 36 now, and as time has gone on, I find this event something that I think about more often. And that, despite becoming more logical and cynical in age. I often ponder its significance and proof of otherworldly beings living alongside of us on this planet. And whenever I think about it, I always shudder. This last year, my dad and I went deer hunting like we do every year. My brothers and uncles and grandpa all go, and we have deer stands spread out across maybe 60 acres deep in the Chippewa National Forest. But my dad's deer stand is one of the closer ones to our camp, so at lunchtime or nighttime, we wait for our family members to walk down the trail and wait for us to get out of our stand to walk back to the camp together. Our deer stand has a sort of locking latch on the outside and the inside, and it's a bit finicky and takes actual strength to get the latch to shut properly, and then you push it down a little to lock it in place too. But there is a latch on the outside and the inside, like I said, so if you unlock it to get in, you lock it from the inside so the door stays shut. Keep in mind it's not actually locked, but it's a latch where you sort of lift it up, push it through the hole, and push it back down to keep it in place. It is impossible, really, to lock yourself in the deer stand. Anyway, it's pretty much completely dark out, and we're waiting for our family to come back down the trail. We didn't see any headlamps yet, but we decided, okay, let's get out and meet them on the trail for when they come. I tried to open the door, but it was stuck shut. My dad's like, what the heck? Why or how would you lock us in like this? I said, Dad, there's no way for me to physically lock the outside after getting in. Not even reaching at the window could you get close to the door latch. We were completely dumbfounded and kind of freaked out. Eventually, my family came to the trail and were just sort of standing waiting for us to get out. My brother walked up to our stand and opened the latch for us, also confused how that could have possibly happened. Like I said, it takes some real strength to push that latch up and through the hole and latch back down like that. And there's just absolutely no possible way that we could have locked the outside from the inside. I still don't know how this happened, but it freaks me out to think that maybe somebody was out there trying to lock us in or something. I'm a little bit nervous to go hunting this year. I hate walking into the woods at 5 a.m. and back to camp at dark. I hope I don't experience anything like that again, because it definitely has me really unnerved.
I, a 21-year-old female, lived with my grandparents for most of my life, up until last year, that is. I've never been as in tune to the supernatural as my brother was. I've seen very few things, and after what I've seen, I think that I'd like to keep it that way, to be honest. The first time I recall seeing this thing was when I was about 18. I was talking with my ex-boyfriend in his car after an argument, and I just so happened to look out towards my grandma's van, and that was when I saw it. It looked like my ex, but faceless, and it was wearing something completely different than what he was. I knew it wasn't a reflection. It was even facing a different way. I didn't say anything to him. I don't know why. I just tried to ignore it, and eventually it just seemed to go away when I looked away. I eventually forgot about this incident, and I just went on with life. A few years ago, though, I started smoking outside with my brother at night because I found out that the only thing that actually puts me to sleep is smoking. Sometimes I'd have to go out alone, and I started seeing this thing again at some point. Honestly, I thought that I was hallucinating at first, but I never saw it anywhere but outside of my house. It looked like my mum once, and when it looked like my brother, it was especially horrifying. It was the realest I'd ever felt, and it just sort of stared at me. It even bent over to look at me from behind the van like my brother would have, because he's so tall. It looked like me once, but it took the form of my dressed up all pretty, and it felt like it was, I don't know, like mocking me almost. And it got harder to ignore it every time. I could feel it. I could feel it looking at me. It never spoke to me or anything. The face would just morph and twist sometimes. I don't think it wanted to hurt me because it never came close or moved. But I stopped going outside alone after that, and I've started staying with my current boyfriend, and I haven't seen it since. My brother has been seeing it longer than I have. He said that on multiple occasions, it had actually chased him back into the house as a fully black shadow figure. He saw it on our laundry room today looking like our mum again, and says that he hears our grandma call his name through the house when she isn't home. So my question is, do you think that we're dealing with a mimic? I've heard about these before from reading other stories elsewhere, but I don't know. I guess I just don't want to believe it, but everything seems to point in that direction, so yeah. I've been working as a property agent in the UK for the past 8 years, selling and renting all sorts of property. And over the years, I've had a few experiences that I couldn't quite explain, and I thought that I would share one of them. So this story happened around November of 2018. I remember because earlier that day, a colleague and I had started filming that year's Christmas videos to go on our company's social media. Each year, we'd recreate a scene of a Christmas movie, and that year was the dance scene from Love Actually. Anyway, I'd been asked by my manager to go and take a photo of a house that we'd just been given the go-ahead on the rent. The house was a 3-bedroom grade 2 listed mid-terrace from around the 16th century. For anyone not knowing, a Grade 2 listed property basically means that it's old and has a lot of original features that can't be changed without special permissions. This was the first time that we'd let the property for the landlord and the tenant before we later found out that he had left the property while still in the contract, within the first 6 months. Now, I knew something wasn't right as soon as I set foot in the property. Everyone gets times when the vibes were off, and I'm not someone who claims to be in touch with their spiritual side or anything, but the atmosphere when I went in was just downright hostile. I was already a little spooked, but I had a job to do, so I opened up a playlist on Spotify, hit shuffle, and started turning the lights on. I have a bit of a system when photographing a property too. Lights on, photograph, measure the room, lights off. The house was your standard layout too. Living room, kitchen, dining room downstairs, 3 bedrooms and bathroom upstairs, with another flight of stairs up to the loft, attic for my American friends. The downstairs I did just fine, trying to ignore the bad vibes by singing along to my probably ABBA or something that I don't remember. But what I do remember though is my trip upstairs. As soon as my foot hit the first step, this overwhelming urge that something was wrong surged through my body. I started singing louder, trying to distract myself, and another few steps up, I was hit with another surge of fear. I tell myself that the upstairs must have been in some sort of dead zone, because it was at this stage that my phone decided that the songs that it had no problem playing 10 minutes ago suddenly needed buffering, meaning that my ABBA was now playing in fits and starts. I fought against my body to get up to the top of the stairs, and when I did, my eyes were drawn to the door to the attic stairs, which lay ajar, and as soon as I did, I was done for. The room beyond the doorway was cloaked in darkness due to the lack of lights being turned on, and the fear that was pushing through my body just took over me. I stood there, paralyzed. I couldn't even blink or take my eyes off of the shadows that lay beyond the doorway. My lungs became like cement as I struggled to catch my breath, my words now breathless. I stood there for what felt like an hour before my phone started to ring. It was the office. We have office protocol to check in if we've been longer than expected. I fumbled to find the answer button, eyes still fixed to the darkness. I hit answer and managed to struggle out a help. This house was walking distance to the office, so it wasn't long before my colleague arrived to check up on me. As soon as I heard his voice call out my name, I felt the weight lift immediately, and I cried out his name in response. I ran downstairs to meet him, and the music returned far too loud, which gave us both a bit of a shock. We both got out of there, and not even checking if the door was locked properly. It was one of those Yale locks that auto-lock when you pull them, so it was fine. We headed back to the office. On the walk back, I noticed a pain shooting across my neck though, and when we got back to the office, I checked to see 3 long scratches running diagonally across my back. This made absolutely no sense to me. I explained what had happened to the others in the office, and my manager told us that she had had a similar feeling when she met the landlord. Maybe because she was with someone it wasn't as scary, but after that we made sure that whenever we visited that property that we were always accompanied. I'm not sure what actually happened to that house in the end. Surprise, surprise, we struggled to find people who could live in that bad vibe house, and the landlord gave it another agent to try and sell in the end. Not long after, I moved to another company as well and onto other properties, which I was grateful for. Like I said, I've had other experiences too, but this was definitely the scariest, and perhaps the strangest too, with the scratches appearing just like that. Maybe one day I'll share the other stories if people are interested, but in any case, thanks for listening. During the fires that consumed Mount Charleston, Nevada, my parents drove out to the mountain when the roads were clear. They described the wildlife to be running around the car as they drove through the open road. My dad told my mum to stop the car, and he got out and started walking through the desert. He realizes that the wilderness is running including snakes and other deadly animals. He also witnesses what looks like a moose or an elk in the distance that was looking at him, walked off in the direction of the rabbits and other wildlife. As he gets in the vehicle, though, both my parents and his father describe seeing a tall man crouched in front of the car all of a sudden, wings draped over his back. As he stands and faces them, his wingspan was wide enough to cover the entire 2-lane road. He then lifted off of the ground in 4 swooshes. They described him as muscular, 6 or an 8-pack, broad shoulders, arms and legs. But the face was apparently mesmerizing. They said that it was hard to describe his face, but it wasn't human. Based on what they said, it sounded a lot like a man-bird. The Mothman was a topic of discussion for them to decide if it was the Mothman. So I guess it probably resembled something like this. If anyone has had any similar stories about this creature or from this area, then please do share it with me, because I really want to try to understand exactly what they say they saw. This happened when I was 16, maybe 17, in the woods of Leelanau County, Michigan. So I was on vacation with family in northern Michigan when we visited a family friend who had lived in the center of the county in a dense forest. I remember when we pulled up the road the house was on was a gravel road instead of a paved road. I remember looking down the gravel road and seeing it go down a hill and turn to the left in the forest. A few hours passed by and I decided to go and check out where the gravel road went. I remember feeling extremely nervous because we were in black bear country, as I grew up in the suburbs of Chicago and never really experienced bears before. When I got into the top of the hill, I remember hearing birds chirping and lots of frogs croaking. The forest felt alive, I guess is what I'm saying, and I did not feel terribly unsafe, only nervous because of the possible presence of bears. As I started walking down the hill, I started whistling the Hunger Games 4-tone whistle, and as I got midway down the hill, I noticed that the birds and the frogs stopped making noise, and the forest fell silent. At this point, my instincts kicked in, and I knew that something was wrong. I remembered learning that the forest goes silent when there's a predator around, yet I still kept going down the hill. I was determined to know what was at the bottom of it. I was still whistling the same 4-tone whistle when I heard something whistle it back perfectly. It made the exact same sound that I made, and it sounded very oddly humanoid, like there was a person watching me, a predator. I remember being frozen in fear, just staring at the area of forest that it came out of before turning around and walking back up the hill. When the house came into view again, I sprinted until I got inside, and I didn't leave anyone's eyesight for the rest of the night. Since then, I have not had any encounters like this, and I've never been back to that area. I don't know if it was something paranormal or if perhaps there was an actual person watching me down there. Both equally terrify me to this day. But if anyone knows of any legends from northern Michigan, from that county, then please do let me know, because I have been thinking about this a lot. So I want to preface this by saying that I've always been more of a skeptic when it comes to the paranormal. I would consider myself one that leans more towards a grounded science view, and one that wants to believe but would need to experience it myself to actually believe. I'm also aware that sharing this is going to yield some amount of confirmation bias, since most here I would assume are going to lean towards believing, but maybe not, who knows. Anyway, a bit of background. My dad's side of the family lives in a home that eventually became the place of death of my nana. She went into hospice when her health deteriorated enough and eventually passed peacefully in her home on the first floor living room in a hospice bed that was set up specifically for her. Nothing weird ever really happened after this to my knowledge as well. Anyway, fast forward to a few years back, my dad has inherited the home and has moved back from across the country with a cat and has since adopted a second cat. Over a few years, I was able to work towards mending things with him, born of a complicated past. Just this summer, though, his health took a rapid turn and he became essentially bedridden and a fall risk, so we sort of set up a bed for him downstairs in the same area that our Nana was in. Unfortunately, he passed just a few days ago and I'm now grieving. He passed away not in the home, but in the hospital. It's also important to say that he was home literally the day before, and in one day he went to the ER and he passed away the following early morning. I've been going over daily to start sorting through important paperwork and taking care of his cats. It was tough going into the house the first time, and I always give a "Hey Dad" greeting coming in, knowing that I won't get a reply, but it's just part of being open and vulnerable in my healing, and I did it prior to his death. And no, this story doesn't lead to hearing a greeting back or anything. But the first night there, just the prior night to sharing this and the encounter, was uneventful, but I bawled my eyes out at the foot of his bed and pretty much every room in the house as well. Before I left, I laid in his bed downstairs and the cats jumped up to join me for snuggles. This evening, though, at 8 p.m, I went over and conducted some of the goals that I had. When the goals were done, I did what I did the previous evening and laid down in his bed. His two loving kitties joined me and I was sending text to my mum, and this is when it happens. So I'm laying there and suddenly this full body chill just hits me. I'm in a tank top and athletic shorts, but I run hot and I've always been very warm in the house. Plus, I'd been moving around a lot just prior to laying down. Really, there was no reason to have chills. Anyway, I get the chills, literally covered in goosebumps head to toe, hair standing at attention every inch of my body. And right at this moment, which happened within seconds, both of the cats reacted like lightning fast and raised their heads and were looking like something startled them. Chills are one thing, right? But the reaction of two furry friends at the exact same time, this is what really sold it for me. All three of us laid there. I wasn't exactly scared, and I don't scare easy these days, but it definitely had me shocked and rattled a bit, unable to process what the heck is happening, so it's difficult to articulate the exact emotion that I was experiencing. But I started to communicate as if it was my dad telling him how much I loved and missed him. Then I realized that maybe this is my Nana. Then I pretty much just said, "Whoever this is." The whole time, though, I felt this full-body feeling of something being there, and the cats were also still more or less focused on whatever this thing had their collective attention on. One cat eventually got up to walk to the water bowl area, and the other cat, I think, just sort of relaxed, but I still had chills everywhere. After this, I got up feeling a bit uncomfortable with the realization that my world and possibly entire system of non-belief was perhaps shattered at this moment. I had chills and bumps the entire time that I brought items to my truck outside, getting ready to leave and forget something inside. I was half expecting to see something when I went back in and was on the edge and moving a bit quicker at this point. So I said my goodbyes and departed, unable to explain or rationalize any of this. I shared this with my wife as soon as I got home, and my 4-month-old as well was staring wide-eyed, looking captivated the whole time. It was actually pretty cute. I also will be sharing this with my mum and sister tomorrow, and had simply texted them saying that something happened. I can't explain and I need to share this. But if you have any input or thoughts, questions or comments, then they're all welcome. Thanks for hearing me out. I guess I'm not as skeptical anymore and think that it was either my Nana or, wishfully, my dad coming back to his home. And as a reminder, Nana passed away in the home, but Dad passed away in the hospital. He spent a lot of time in this very bed, though. Let me start this by saying that I've never truly believed in ghosts. I never wanted to, nor drew any interest into believing in the paranormal, until me and my wife moved into our new home at the start of the year. We live in a nice area. The house isn't too old and we're in Michigan. when we first moved in, there was absolutely no reason for us to believe that it was haunted. About 2 months went by and we started to experience things that could be written off as natural, I guess, such as lights turning on, electronics turning on or off, or curtains moving. But we blamed it all on faulty electricity wiring or breezes, and didn't think too much of it, other than making a few jokes about it being haunted. Eventually, though, things escalated, and boy, did they escalate quickly. The first big encounter that we experienced was our bedroom door slamming shut while we were watching a movie downstairs, and it was loud enough to rattle the paintings on the living room wall, so of course we ran up to check what happened. When we opened the door, the bedding was off of our bed when it was originally tidy, and the curtain pole had fell off the window. We didn't think too much of this, as we believed that it fell off due to the door being slammed since our paintings rattled downstairs as well, but I thought it was worth a mention. Anyway, we got spooked by this obviously, and this would now happen regularly. It was never a different room too, always the main bedroom, the door being slammed during the day and at night, things being in places that we didn't leave them, pillows on the floor, etc. Before I mention this next part though, I just want to ensure that you know that my wife has never ever experienced sleep paralysis in her entire life, until one night in April where she woke up and saw a tall figure that resembled a human but wasn't. The figure didn't move. She described it as just standing still, watching in the corner of the room. This freaked her out enough that she woke me up and we both had to sit and watch a movie until she could feel comfortable enough to fall asleep again. The things didn't stop there though. They got more aggressive, I guess. We haven't been physically harmed, well, yet, but things would be thrown. Paintings dropped off of the walls, pillows thrown across the room again, bottles of deodorant being slammed off of walls. It's to the point where I'm mentally drained of coming home from work and knowing that there's a huge mess to clean up when I get there. So, my question for all of you is, what can we do? What is this thing that is doing all of this, and why? I mean, our house isn't that old. I'd say the 60s or 70s. We live in a nice area, so why would it be haunted? I'm really hoping to get closure here, and I understand that most people won't believe anything that I've said, but we are so mentally drained at this point, and we can't afford to move, so I'm desperate. Please, if you can, help us. I fear that things are only going to get worse from this point too, and physical. Is this a warning? Is this just getting started? Anything. Any help, please. This happened in the early to mid-1980s. I was about 12 and had a group of friends that I hung out with regularly. I lived in Louisiana. There was this fad back then too to open these teen nightclubs. No alcohol, just disco music and the same vibe as the cocaine-induced frenzy of adult disco clubs, I guess. But anyway, one was opening up. My friends couldn't stop talking about it. I hate crowds, but I was a follower in my group, so in the end I agreed to go with everybody. One of our parents dropped us off, we paid our $2 to get in. I can see that it's super crowded, shoulder to shoulder. I just kind of hung out around the front door debating whether or not I was going to stay. After 10 or 15 minutes pass, I get this feeling like somebody is watching me. Just an eerie sort of creepy vibe. So I just start looking around. There's a lot of people, so it's a bit like a blur. Then I notice this middle-aged guy, short brown hair, striped collared shirt. He's just staring at me like maybe he knows me or something. Well, I knew that I didn't know him, and that was my cue to leave. It was about a 5-mile walk down a well-lit, semi-busy 2-lane highway, then right and another couple of miles down a 4-lane road into the subdivision. It's only about 8 p.m. and I don't have to be home till midnight, so I have time to walk it. So I take off walking, and I guess about halfway home, this car pulls up on the side of the road that I was crossing, and it's the same guy from the nightclub. My heart starts pounding out of my chest, I mean, he creeped me out when there was like around 200 people around. I was really creeped out on an isolated side street by myself now. But he yells at me and asks if I want to ride. And I mean, it's pretty far, but to heck with that. I said no and I kept walking. Then he yells at me, "You want to make an easy $20? And I'm dumb. I stop and ask, "How?" He says, "Get in the car and I'll tell ya." But nope, I just bolted. I took off, and I don't think I've ever run that fast in my entire life. I ran the last 3.5 miles full speed without stopping and without looking back. I made it home, ran inside the house, and straight to my room. I didn't even think to look back, since if he was following me, but if he came here, at least my dad was in the living room at this point. I never did tell anybody about what actually happened that night, but when I think back on it, I really think that I was one dumb move away from being on a milk carton, or maybe something worse. Almost 10 years ago, I was in a relationship with this guy. His name was Craig, who claimed that he had a spirit that had been following him around since early childhood. According to Craig, it never caused any physical harm. It just sort of clung to him and would occasionally reveal itself in bizarre ways. Craig's family was apparently very aware of this and believed it, claiming to have witnessed numerous bizarre occurrences over the years, all of which happened whenever Craig was around. Honestly, I didn't believe this for a second, not at all. And because I didn't believe it, it felt like a bit of a red flag. I mean, why would he make up something so random and bizarre and share it with me so out of the blue when nothing had warranted it? But being in my early 20s at the time, I just chose to ignore it, because he was great and seemed so normal otherwise. I suppose I eventually chose to believe that he genuinely believed it, which was preferable to the idea that he would maintain such a lie for so long just to unsettle me. Still, I pulled a Dennis Scully and reasoned that all the strange events that he had experienced throughout his life must have had reasonable explanations. Now, one night, Craig was staying over at my place. This was actually the first time that we'd ever spent an entire night together. We talked, made future plans, made out, and listened to music. Before we knew it, it was 2 a.m, and this was around the time that something really strange happened. We were both sitting on the floor of my bedroom, backs against the far wall opposite my bedroom door, looking for music videos to watch on my laptop, when 3 loud, fast knocks came from the door. I was so startled because it was extremely late, and the only other person present in the house at that time was my mum, who had gone to sleep hours ago and only ever got up to use the bathroom. She certainly never knocked on my door at such a late hour, especially if I had company over. I silently listened if I had imagined the knocks, because it was late and I was feeling pretty tired. But no, because when I had looked over at Craig, he was also looking at the door. This is the part where I imagine that a lot of listeners will probably decide that this story is fake, but hey, I'm going to stay true to my experience, so here it goes. So right before I'm about to call out to my mum, I hear a very angry male voice call my name, similar to how an angry father might shout at their child for breaking something valuable. It took Craig and I several minutes to finally muster up the courage to stand and creep over to the door. Before that, we comically stayed pressed against the wall, silently staring at the door and occasionally glancing at each other. I pressed my ear against the door and didn't hear anything, so I eventually opened it, but not before retrieving a golf club from my closet, and saw nothing. Just a normal dark hallway. Craig and I proceeded to check every spot in the house, even opening closet doors, and in the end we found nothing. While we did this though, I remember feeling like eyes were burning into me, as if someone was angrily watching and judging my every move. It had given me goosebumps, but because we didn't find anyone, I shrugged away that feeling. When Craig and I finally got into bed shortly after, I expressed feeling very creeped out, naturally. Craig, though, nonchalantly replied something to the effect of, "I told you, I have a spirit that follows me around." I had been really unnerved by this reply. He had said it a little too matter-of-factly for my liking. Anyway, fast forward several weeks when Craig is sleeping over at my place again. We were hanging out in the kitchen shortly after midnight when Craig received a call from his sister. He decided to step out into the backyard for the call. It's worth noting too that the backyard connected to the kitchen via a large sliding glass door, so I could see him at all times, so long as I remained in the kitchen and he stayed by that door. It's also worth noting too that the kitchen sink had a very large window directly above it, a window that looked out to the side of the house. I mention this because I decided to wash dishes while Craig took the call. While washing the dishes, I alternated between looking out the window in front of me and glancing to my right, where I could see Craig leaning against the glass door as he conversed with his sister. When I got to a particularly dirty dish, I stopped looking out of the window and to my right, so I could focus on getting the dish clean. When I achieved this, I looked back at the window and immediately took a couple of steps back, because standing right outside of the window was Craig, who was now smiling at me, and I don't mean an ordinary smile. I'm talking a highly exaggerated grin with lots of teeth showing, eyes blown wide open. If you've seen the recent horror movie Smile, then you know exactly what I'm talking about. It was very similar to that. After I collected myself, I laughed and shook my head at Craig before gesturing at him to knock it off and come back inside. But he stayed completely motionless, eyes still burning into mine, his grin never faltering. He didn't even blink. After another 10 seconds or so went by, I began to feel very unsettled by this. Mind you, I had still been under the impression that he was just trying to make me feel uncomfortable via his version of a joke, so I was mostly unnerved that he would commit to the gag for so long, more than anything else, I guess. I certainly didn't consider it could be anything else, even after the previous incident. And out of nowhere, while I was still looking directly at Craig through the window, I heard the sliding glass door open to my right. When this happened, I looked away from the window and saw Craig coming back inside from the backyard. When I looked back at the window, the smiling Craig was now gone. Now, I want to make it crystal clear. Unless Craig had secret teleportation powers I didn't know about, there was just no way that he could have moved from the window to the sliding glass door while I was staring right at him like that. It would have been impossible. When I told Craig what I had just experienced, he said, "I believe you. Something like that has happened before." Craig just grabbed my hand and led me to my bedroom, and I felt eyes burning into my back the whole way there. Up until Craig shut my bedroom door, that is. But even then, after we got into bed, I could still sense something standing on the other side of that door. We split up not long after this, due to something unrelated. Believe it or not too, nothing strange has ever happened since. Almost a full decade later, and I haven't experienced anything. I never feel like I'm being watched, nor have I seen anything strange. But if you've listened this far, then thanks, and I would love to get some thoughts. I've had other bizarre experiences, all of which occurred prior to meeting Craig, but nothing that was ever so blatant, I guess. I'll admit that I'm still somewhat of a skeptic, but whenever I try to come up with a reasonable explanation for the experiences that I just mentioned, I always come up empty. I typically forget about these encounters, but this time of the year naturally brings the memories back, I guess, even though they happened at a completely different time of the year. In any case, if you do have some thoughts, then please share them in the comments below. When I, female and 33, was 20 years old, not too long after the 2007 housing crash, my family and I moved into a house in Martins Ferry, Ohio. It previously was a duplex that was converted into one sort of large house. It had 2 floors, 6 bedrooms, 4 on the second floor, 2 on the ground floor, 1 bathroom right next to my bedroom, and a very short basement. I couldn't stand up straight in it, and I'm 5'9". So I lived there with my two older brothers, A and E, 22 and 21, and little sister H, 13. Our rooms were on the second floor, as well as my mother and my stepfather, 52 and 45 respectively. I also have an older sister, D, 27. Now, I didn't come from a great home life, and eventually my stepfather was put in jail for DUIs and driving without a license. Everything was fine when we moved in, though. We all had previously experienced paranormal activity in other homes that we lived in. This wasn't something unusual or frightening because we lived in an oldish city anyway. Other than seeing, hearing, smelling some weird things, nothing was outstandingly frightening. Dee lived with her husband at the time, along with their two small children. Her husband was financially abusive and was also an addict who got Dee addicted as well. And one day, Dee called me crying because her husband had spent all of her money on drugs, left her car on empty, and had left her alone at home with the children, and they had no food to eat. I spoke with my mother, and we came up with a game plan to get my sister out. I advised her to pack up everything she could fit in the car, pack up the kids, and meet me at the gas station. She lived a short 20-minute drive away across the river, and I met her at the gas station, and while I filled her car with gas, I hugged her as she cried. I bought her a pack of smokes, and we both drove back to the house. What we didn't know was that Dee was just starting into the worst few years of her addiction, and due to all of the negative energy, something dark seemed to have attached to her as well. The first thing that I remember was just how dreary the house felt after she had moved in. She eventually was fired from her job as a nurse because she had been caught stealing meds from her patients. She decided to get back with her husband, and he moved in because he couldn't afford their house payments due to spending all his money on drugs, and she also had a boyfriend that she was cheating on him with. It was a very tumultuous time because Dee is the type of person who thinks all other women are out to get her and steal her man. So she assumed that I was trying to sleep with her husband because I tried to be civil around him. I was engaged to someone else at the time, mind you. And after a day full of my sister trying to physically attack me, this is when this dark thing started to materialize. So at night, I would be in bed and feel like something was watching me. Anytime I was doing schoolwork, I felt like someone was standing behind me while I sat at my desk in my bedroom. It evolved into things in my room being moved around when nobody else was able to get into my room. Then my blankets would be pulled off in my sleep. Eventually, I started hearing someone walking around my room at night as well. Then the scratches started appearing. I would wake up with random scratches on my legs, on my back where I couldn't reach them. And one night, I was grabbed by my leg and ripped off my bed by something that I wasn't able to see. Mind you, I am not a small woman by any means, so it would take someone quite strong to yank me that hard and that fast off of my bed in a dead weight, dead sleep like that. Another terrifying night, I heard it walk around the hallway outside of my bedroom. I lit some sage to cleanse my room and started chanting a protection spell over and over again for nearly half an hour. My fiancé Jay, 19 at the time, called me extremely upset, telling me that something was in his house outside of his room, growling, and he felt like he was going to be attacked if he left his room. The next day I went over to his house. He lived in a town that I grew up in where my sister and my whole family lived before we moved into this new house. And there were literal gouged scratches in his wooden door from where whatever it was had been waiting apparently. I asked him if I had left anything at his house within the last few days, and I looked around and saw my watch on the windowsill by his bed. I don't know if that had anything to do with it, but something was telling me that whatever this thing was, it was now fixated on me. So I am a skeptical believer of these sorts of things, a doubting Thomas type, if you will. However, as a kid, I did used to see shadow people all the time and have heard strange things, i.e. what sounded like parents' voices calling me from downstairs, even though my parent was sitting right next to me upstairs. But when I was in college a few years back, I had a strange encounter in my dorm room. My roommate was in the room as well. It was late and I was sleeping soundly when I randomly woke up for whatever reason. I don't know why, but I sat up and at the foot of my bed, in the pitch dark, was a man. He was completely shadowy with glowing red eyes just sitting and staring at me. I remember locking eyes with him for a split second and sort of giving a weak scream. I instantly hid under my blankets, because that will protect you from supernatural entities, right? And waited a few moments before peeking out from beneath the blankets. And he was still there, staring at me. I don't remember what really happened after that, to be honest. I think I just fell back asleep with my head under the blankets. My roommate said that she didn't hear me scream or anything, so I really don't know what to think of it. Maybe hiding under the blankets does help after all. I talked to some of my friends about it though, and they said that I must have been dreaming, but I really don't think so. I mean, I felt wide awake after locking eyes with whatever that thing was. My heart was racing quickly too. But what was that thing? Was it the Hat Man that I've heard stories about? Has anyone else experienced this, or should I be concerned? Anyway, a few years later, this is completely unrelated, I think. I was visiting an old cemetery in Richmond, VA, and came across a grave covered with evil eye necklaces, rose quartz crystals, and the like. I was intrigued and went to take a closer look. There was a jar at the foot of the grave with a picture of a lady inside and a bunch of broken mirror shards. I really don't remember if I heard the whispering before or after I noticed the jar, but I remember hearing whispering near my ear of voices speaking rapidly. I was alone in this part of the cemetery, but my idiot self for some reason said, "Hello, anyone there?" and the whispering got closer. For some reason, and I don't really ever touch things in cemeteries, I felt really compelled to touch this jar, and stranger still, despite how terrifying this situation was, I couldn't bring myself to feel afraid. My brain was screaming for me to run, but my heart and body were just perfectly calm. In fact, in the end, I sort of had to force myself to run, and it felt like I was running in a dream almost. The grave had this sort of magnetism to it, and the air felt sort of pressurized as well. As I ran, my foot started hurting like I'd sprained it. It didn't stop hurting until I made it back to my car and eventually drove home. But my question for all of you is, what does a jar with broken mirror shards mean? I have asked my witchcraft practicing friends and they aren't sure. They just said that the situation was bad and dangerous and that I probably should just not go back there. But have any of you guys experienced anything like this, and what does this all mean? This happened to me when I was 4 years old. It's been 30 years, but I remember it like it was yesterday. There were so many strange occurrences in this house, but this is the one that started everything. My entire family has lived in the same small SE Kansas town for 4 generations now. My mother grew up there and moved away with her mother when she was around 15. A year later, she was involved in a very tragic car accident where she was the only one who survived. After waking up from a month-long coma, there was a lawsuit against the company who owned the other vehicle, and my mom won a large settlement. Shortly after the lawsuit, my mother was whisked back to the small Kansas town by her father. It wasn't long before my mother was back in high school, met my father, and was pregnant with me. By the time she was 17, she had married my father and graduated from high school. They bounced around from small house to apartment to small house again. In a town of 1,000 people, there isn't much to choose from. Eventually, they got sick of the roach-filled slums and they decided to use the money my mum had to buy a house. As with the rental side of things, houses were somewhat tough to come by as well. Most homes are family-owned and have been for decades, but they did find one house available for sale. The house that they settled on was a large 2-story home across the street from the high school. It was built in the 1800s, when the streets in town were either dirt or brick. And as with any big, creepy old house next to a high school, people talked about it. but none of my parents' friends had ever actually been inside. When my mum viewed it, she found it to be absolutely beautiful. She insistently spent most of her settlement on the house and purchased it in her name alone. My mum, dad, and my 3-year-old self moved in shortly after. Less than a year later, my parents divorced and my dad moved out though. My mum and I ended up living here mostly alone for the next 9 years. I know that this is getting a bit long too, but it's important to understand the layout of the home for this and almost all stories that happened here, so bear with me. So you opened the front door to a large staircase in the middle of the home. On the left was a small living room area, and on the right was a larger living room-esque space, bisected by what was once a double doorway, but the door was missing. The bathroom was under the stairs, which led to one downstairs bedroom. Spanning the back of the home was the kitchen and laundry room, which was clearly once a back porch. Upstairs was a bit strange, but the staircase was in the center of the house, which led almost all the way to the back of the home. At the top of the stairs, to the right, was a bedroom, mine, and to the left a long hallway. In the middle of the hallway was a door to another bedroom, Mum's, and at the end was a room that we called the balcony room. So, it was a cool fall night in 1994. My mum and I had been at a friend's house, Jaybird, that's what we called him anyway, for most of the evening listening to the Smashing Pumpkins, Nirvana, or whatever edgy music was most popular back then. She was 21, into partying, dumber than a box of rocks, and had no problem dragging me along through all of her stuff. But that's another story. I remember though having a good time with all of her friends, and they usually treated me pretty well, so I had a good time hanging out late into the night with them. But around 2 or 3 in the morning, it was time for us to go home. We pulled into the driveway in front of the garage after a short 10-minute drive. The garage was about 100 feet from the back of the house, and we could see our bedroom lights shining through the large curtains in the upstairs windows. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary or strange at all. We walked up the small path to the back door that led to the laundry room, both sort of yawning and ready to go to sleep. Once we got inside, the light from the large living room shined through the open doorway into the kitchen, lighting our way. We walked through the kitchen and into the living room, and that was when we heard it. Footsteps, somewhere inside of the house. We peered into the living room, but couldn't see anything out of the ordinary. Mum called out hello, but there was no response, just more footsteps. Mum and I made the trek to the front of the house, stopping near the foot of the stairs. The light from the living room bled over the bottom few stairs into the smaller living room on the other side. Unfortunately, the upstairs hallway light had been out since we moved in. That's why we typically left the bedroom lights on, by the way, so the light could bleed into the hallway. But looking up the staircase was looking up into complete darkness at this point. But someone had turned off the bedroom lights and was now running around upstairs. Mum called out again, "Hello, who's up there?" Of course, no response again. The footsteps were getting more intense though. Like most old houses, when something is dropped or someone is stomping on the floor, you pretty much feel it everywhere. We were starting to feel these steps, and they were now turning into stomps. One last time, my mum called out, "Who's running around up there?" and for a split second the footsteps stopped. Then the stomping started, and I could feel the stomps walking down the hallway towards the top of the stairs. Then they started almost running down the staircase. My mum and I stood petrified, knowing whoever was running around in our home was about to reveal themselves by stepping into the light. I remember feeling them in the floor, getting closer with every stomp. The stomping stopped right at the foot of the stairs, but there was nothing there. It seemed like forever that Mum and I both stood there staring at the last step, but I'm sure it was only a second. Then, as quickly as it stopped, the stomping started again, back up the stairs, around the banister and down the hallway. Once we snapped out of it, Mum picked me up and ran back to the car. She backed out of the driveway and we went back to Jay's house, and once we got there, Mum told Jay what we had seen. "There's no way. Someone must be messing with you, Jen," he said. She begged him to come back to the house and to see it for himself, and eventually he agreed. We pulled up to the front of the house this time, not even bothering with the back door that we usually came through. I'm sure Mum expected us to open the door and everything to be completely normal. Jay would laugh at the situation and we'd take him home. I know I did anyway. But that's not what happened at all. Jay opened the door first and we all walked in. Standing at the foot of the stairs, just where Mum and I had been 20 minutes ago, we heard the same stomps as before. Instantly, Jay said, "Watch, we're going to go outside and find the ladder that they climbed up to get into your house. We'll pull it down and they'll have to reveal themselves." We went outside and found, of course, no ladder or any other way that someone could have broken in. We went back inside and it happened again. All the way to the bottom of the stairs again, right in front of Mum, Jay, and myself. Jay ushered us outside at this point and said, "How about you guys stay at my place tonight?" So we spent the night at Jay's house. The next morning we went back. The sunlight was shining in, illuminating the upstairs hallway. When we made it to the top of the stairs, everything was normal. Nothing was misplaced, no windows were broken or left open. Everything was exactly how we left it. This is one of the earliest childhood memories that I have. I was just a little guy back then, and I didn't really understand what had happened to me. I just knew that it wasn't normal. Little did I know that this was the first of many paranormal experiences in this home that I would have, and its history had much more to tell us. August this past year, my family stayed at an Airbnb in Purcellville, VA, 10 minutes outside of Harper's Ferry. Look up the John Brown raid, and about 45 minutes away from Gettysburg. The house itself is older than the town, built in 1752 and on a current working farm vineyard. But here's the setup of the house. So, you enter into the oldest part of the home. You can see these two sections, kitchen and sitting room, where the original cabin before past owners built on. Through the sitting room was a small library, another sitting area, and my parents' room on the first floor but off the ground outside. When you go up the stairs of the sitting room, there's a bathroom to the right, 2 doors in front of the stairs, and a room to the left over the kitchen. My husband and I stayed in this room over the kitchen as the bedroom directly in front of the stairs gave me the creeps. It had the original fireplace in there, but something when I walked in just felt off. My sister and brother-in-law stayed on the floor above us, as that room has its own window and AC unit. The house has no communal AC, just individual in-room units. We arrived on a Sunday. So Monday morning, my dad asked me about footsteps from the night prior. He said that he was sitting at the kitchen table on his computer and could hear footsteps walking around the house above him. My dad had also been making jokes and tends to be a little theatrical with his humor, leading up to a vacation, calling it Ghost Central, so I told him that our room is above the kitchen and I wouldn't think anything of it. It was probably just one of us getting ready for bed or whatever. He then mentioned that he thought that he saw a bright light shining outside of his window and was tempted to look but thought better of it. Again though, my dad has also had a history of wild dreams and sleepwalking, so I just sort of brushed it off. Randomly too, my husband asked me to help him move the crib from the other side of our room to be next to our bed. I didn't think anything of it, as he said that it was just to be easier because our room was so big. It was half the full length of the original cabin with only our bed at the far end of the room, opposite from the crib and a bathroom. Anyway, on Tuesday, my dad's birthday, we sat in the old dining room for dinner. The room is a stunning, picturesque old farmhouse dining room with a big window overlooking the field, shed and barn, with the mountains around us too. It was still light outside, about 5 p.m. while we were eating, and I looked outside of the window and noticed the shed door seeming slightly ajar. I didn't think too much of it, but the next time I looked up, it looked more open, but slightly enough that I thought that I was just overthinking it. This then happened several more times. The door was more open, more closed, etc. I didn't want to scare my already anxious dad, so I texted my husband, "Can you go out and check the shed? The door keeps opening, I think." He checks his phone, and when we both look up, we watch the shed door slowly open itself completely, and then just as slowly closed itself shut again. My husband went outside with my dad to check it out, but in the end, nobody was there. We locked the shed and said that it shouldn't open again, but it was weird that the door would both open and close itself like that, right? Anyway, Wednesday we were gone for the day in DC, but on Thursday we went to Gettysburg for the day, and my husband left after dinner to put the baby to bed so I could do the ghost tour with my family. When we got home, my husband, who is naturally very skeptical of ghosts and hyperlogical about everything, said that he heard footsteps upstairs when he got in. Now, my dad and sister had met the groundskeeper on a walk along the property earlier in the week, and my husband said that he was worried the guy was a weirdo walking around the house and maybe snooping while we were gone. Another thing about the house too is that the sound doesn't travel at all. What I mean is that sitting in the kitchen, you didn't get an echo, or had to speak very loud and clear to someone in the next room. No acoustics, in other words. So he checked every room and closet to make sure that nobody was in the house. That's how loud the steps were, and he was a little spooked, but we decided not to say anything because my family was making comments all week about the house and we didn't want to upset anyone. That night, I thought that I was starting to get paranoid because I could have sworn that I was hearing a knocking above my head, and also thought that I was smelling vanilla. On the ghost tour, we learned that the townspeople dealt with the smell of corpses for months post-war by dipping face masks in vanilla, lavender, and mint. I thought that I was just spooked, and I did my best to sleep, but when I woke up the next morning, always the first because I have my routine with our daughter, I noticed that the kitchen cabinets were left open. I was confused, but just closed them, and while my daughter was taking a nap later that morning, I tapped her monitor and the camera rotated all the way down. That really confused me. Had I held it down, or am I just overthinking it? My family decided to spend the day in Leesburg as our last full day before we left Saturday. At lunch, I mentioned the cabinets, and my dad said that it might have been him. He got my mum a glass of water before bed, apparently, but we all went to bed after him, so that didn't make any sense. Then, my sister mentioned that she woke up in a cold sweat at 3 a.m. She said that she was having a really weird dream and thought that she heard someone whisper in her ear, "Don't move." She said that before bed, her and her husband were watching more videos about Gettysburg and saw a bright flash of light outside the window, so bright that she even checked the weather thinking that maybe there was a lightning storm on the way or something. Then I looked at my husband and said, "Did you tell them about the footsteps?" He hadn't. He shared his story and then said that he also woke up at 3 a.m. in a cold sweat this morning. My sister also mentioned that she also hated the first bedroom. There was something about the fireplace that really creeped her out the same way it gave me the weird vibes. So in the end, we all decided to keep the door shut all week without saying anything to each other about it. We were all stunned, but my sister immediately started panicking, asking if we could leave. We were all on the fence about it. I mean, we were planning to leave Saturday at 6 a.m. regardless, to get home and to return to our rentals, but we weren't entirely convinced. We finished our day out, came home and began to pack up what we needed to, and then we went to dinner with the plan to stay one more night. And this is where everything got really weird. So when we got home from dinner, the bedroom door that we kept shut was actually cracked open, and then air was coming out of it that was so cold it was like standing directly in front of the AC. It was just my husband and I on the stairs, and we looked at each other, and he quickly shut it before my sister came up because, well, we didn't want her to freak out even more. We put the baby to bed, and I headed downstairs because we all talked about having one last fire pit outside. My husband stayed with the baby until she fell asleep, but when I came downstairs, my family was all huddled together saying, "We need to go." My sister was really scared and didn't want to stay another night in their room. After some discussion, we all decided that it'd be best to leave at this point. We were only like 3 hours from home, and we could sleep in our own beds before midnight. We got the cars loaded up relatively quickly, and I had our daughter in her car seat and was talking with my sister, with the car door open as the boys all did a final walk through the house. From the outside, you can see perfectly who is where in the house too. I could see my dad walking into what was our room on the second floor with my husband, and I could see the flashlights scanning the top floor simultaneously where my sister and brother-in-law slept. My husband had his flashlight on when he went into the house, so I assumed that it was him up there. After a few minutes, my dad throws out some final trash, and I see him sort of half running or scuffling to the car, and he says, "Okay, time to go." We start heading down the driveway and turn to my husband and asked why he didn't just turn the lights on upstairs when he checked it. And he said that he wasn't up there, that it was my brother-in-law. My dad yelled up the stairs asking if brother-in-law was up there, and husband heard, "Yeah, I'm up here." At that point, my sister calls me. I ask her if brother-in-law was upstairs to do a final sweep, and he said no. He didn't go upstairs at all, and my dad, in their car, confirmed it. My dad said that he yelled up the stairs if he was there, and my brother-in-law apparently yelled from the first floor though, "No, I'm in the kitchen." When everyone asked why, I told them what I saw, and it was like someone was walking around the third floor with a flashlight scanning the room. My dad mentioned that when he went into my room to check it, his flashlight started to die at that point, and when he stepped into the hallway, it came back on. My husband agreed and shared when he went into our room with my dad that he felt sort of suddenly numb as well. And while my dad was locking the house up on the keypad, he started the 4-digit code, and the house locked itself on the second number. And when he went to throw out the last of the trash, his flashlight started to die again. And that's when we all saw him shuffling to the car. Oh, and when we tried to find any information on this house, it's so old and historical that there's got to be something, right? But we found nothing, except the 2020 Zillow listing from the last owner, who literally had 6 packed paragraphs of information about the house, and under what the owner loves about the house is one sentence. The house was a Civil War field hospital, and then goes on to talk about the home's 66 acres and nearby locations. Needless to say, after all of that, we all felt better about coming home and not spending another night there. Sometimes I wonder if ghosts just get comfortable or familiar, and as more weird stuff happened leading up to the night that we left, I would not have been able to sleep that night. The owner texted my dad the next day to give check-out instructions, and my dad said that we left last night. "I'm sure we're not the first to tell you this, but your place is haunted." The owners were surprised and said that we actually were the first to say so, and asked what we experienced and that it was a Civil War field hospital per Zillow. They simply said, "Well, it definitely has its history," and asked us to leave a review. In the